Chair, you have a live mic.
Thank you, Ms. Patterson. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Phase 1 of today's Commissioner meeting. Just want to say thank you for coming. Looking forward to today's what we have to do. Just as a reminder, please turn your cell phones off so that doesn't go off when Randy's talking to God. And public comments, if you have any comments to make, I want to remind you we have a system here that we're going to follow. 3 minutes. We are most interested to hear what you have to say, but we're most interested in 3 minutes. So there's a yellow light that will go off and it'll give you 30 seconds, and the red light's when you land the plane. So just as a reminder of that, we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So with that, Pastor Holman.
Morning, Commissioners, and thank you for the privilege to lead us in our opening prayer. If we can bow our heads. Father, this morning we thank you for this day. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity that we have to come to serve our community and to serve you in our gifts and talents that you've given us, Lord. Lord, I thank you for this community, and I thank you for the incredibly 100 years that you have blessed this city and this community with the resources and the leadership that we've been able to experience. God, as we continue to move forward, we set this agenda before you today, and we ask, God, that every decision and every conversation and the hearts of those that's involved in this meeting and planning today, God, would be led by you, that you would give a spirit of wisdom, a spirit of discernment, counsel, and most importantly, the fear of you, Lord, in our hearts and all decisions that we make. Guide the conversations and guide the spirit and keep this meeting and keep this community in a spirit of unity that you have set before us. We thank you for this day, and we give you the glory and the honor, and knowing that at the end of this day, that everything that is said and done is done by your leading and your guiding. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
And I have asked Wayne Smith to do our pledge. And Wayne, in 30 seconds, before you say the pledge, could you tell us what America means to you?
Oh, my. Can you hear me? Yes. You have about 2 or 3 hours? Can you hear me all right? Well, of course, I think most of the people know, well, I know all of you, of course, but I did have a little bit of a time in my life where I spent as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam for 5.5 years. There were others that were there almost 8 years, by the way. But we came out of it. There were actually 550 of us, over 1,200 or so that were killed in that environment. But in any event, we came out, had our 50th reunion this year of coming out, and there were 125 of us at this time. Anyway, I'm here to do the pledge. Sorry that I spent some time.
Thank you, Wayne.
Can you hear it? Okay. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir.
I make a lot better door than I do a window.
Yeah.
And for you, keep that veterans thing going.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Wayne.
Sir, Wayne.
Ms. Patterson.
Commissioners, agenda changes for January 23rd, 2024. First, we need to correct the placement of item 16B2. It actually needs to be item 17C. This is a recommendation that the board approve a proposed ordinance modification to Collier County Ordinance Number 2006-56, the Rock Road Improvement Municipal Service Taxing Unit, to reestablish an advisory committee to provide input to the county on matters related to the MSTU. That is, again, just an agenda placement issue. Next, move item 16A7 to item 11C. This is a recommendation to waive the nighttime hearing requirement and hear a land development code amendment regarding food trucks and food truck parks at 2 regularly scheduled daytime Board of County Commissioners meetings and approve a request to advertise the land development code amendment. This is being moved at Commissioner Saunders' request. Add on item 10B to be heard immediately following 4A. This is a presentation from the Productivity Committee regarding outsourcing versus insourcing of transportation engineering, construction, and engineering inspection services. This is being brought to the agenda at Commissioner Saunders' request. Add-on item 10C is a recommendation to approve acceptance of 80 to 100 donated air purifiers from Carrier Air and direct staff to implement a program for distribution to Collier County nonprofit organizations by application, with priority given to healthcare facilities and organizations that offer short-term or long-term residential services. This item is brought to the agenda at Commissioner Saunders' request. We have a request to continue items 9A and 9B to the February 27th, 2024 BCC meeting. This is the Matson at Vanderbilt GMPA and PUDZ, and this is being made by the applicant's request. We also have a staff communication item related to the boil water notice in North Collier County and community communication. This is being brought to the agenda at Commissioner Saunders' request, and we may talk about that a little earlier in the meeting today. We do have the 2 times certain items. That is item 10B, which I had mentioned previously, to be heard immediately following 4A. That is the Productivity Committee's presentation, and our nighttime event item 10A to be heard at 5 p.m. This is related to the moratorium ordinance on privately initiated growth management plan amendment applications. With that, County Attorney.
No changes, thank you.
I should also mention court reporter break scheduled for 10:30 and 2:50 if we're still here before our 5 o'clock. Commissioners, ex parte on the consent and summary and any further changes.
Ex parte, Commissioner McDaniel.
No ex parte and no changes, sir.
Same here, no ex parte, no changes.
Mr. Saunders.
I have no ex parte and no changes. I would like to just a quick comment on item 10C. I don't like bringing things to the board without prior notice, but this came up rather suddenly. It's a good news issue, and so I made the assumption that no one would object to it being placed on the agenda with little notice.
Mr. Kowal.
No ex partes and no changes.
I have no ex partes. How long is the productivity thing gonna?
The presentation is quite short. It'll be the discussion portion of it.
I want to get to the discussion on the water immediately, so I'm good with that. No changes. Motion to approve the
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Commissioners, that brings us to awards and recognitions. We were going to have 2 today, but one of our employees was unable to attend. So our only service award today is a 20-year attendee, Javier Moreno from Parks and Recreation. Congratulations.
Good morning. Thank you. Congratulations. Thank you. Long time. Too cool for school. Hobby.
Item 3A4 was going to be a 35-year attendee. We will catch up with him on at a future board meeting. 35 years is definitely something to celebrate. That brings us to item 4, proclamations. Item 4A is a proclamation designating January 25th, 2024 as Naples Area Board of Realtors Day in Collier County, to be accepted by P.J. Smith, 2024 President, NABOR. Congratulations.
forward. Absolutely. Gotta make sure you do it properly. Forward.
Thank you.
Hit that button, see if it.
Check, check. Oh, there we go. Great. It is my great honor to receive this important proclamation designating January 25th as the Naples Area Board of Realtors Day in Collier County. On behalf of the Naples Area Board of Realtors and about 8,400 members, plus or minus 100 every day, I would like to sincerely thank the county commissioners for your acknowledgement, neighbor members for their support and leadership, and the community for your continued support. This recognition truly commemorates neighbors' important impact and key achievements in the Naples area on the advent of our 75th anniversary. We look forward to celebrating this year with you as we honor the past, celebrate the present, and embrace the collective future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Peter.
Commissioners, if we could get a motion to accept the proclamation.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Kowal, seconded by Commissioner Saunders. All in favor? Aye.
Thank you. This brings us to our add-on item, which is item 10B, a presentation from the Productivity Committee regarding outsourcing versus insourcing of transportation engineering, construction, and engineering inspection services, CEI. And we do have our representative from the Productivity here to make a presentation. Mr. Godshaw, welcome.
As Jerry is approaching the podium, I wanted to tell the board and the audience that I'm very proud of the Productivity Committee meetings, Productivity Committee. I attend their meetings, do miss one every now and then, and I can tell you it's one of the hardest working committees that I've participated in over the years. A lot of very experienced individuals, and they really dig into county budgets and processes, and this was one of the issues that the Productivity Committee took a look at, and that was the outsourcing of engineering. And I asked them to go ahead and make a presentation for two reasons. One, to talk about the issue, but also to just let this board know that the Productivity Committee is alive and well and doing a lot of good work.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Jerry Godshaw. My background is actually in economics. And I've been on part of this committee for close to 5 years now in various forms. And I want to say, first of all, it's been a pleasure to work with most of the county staff. They're very professional, they've been very cooperative, and they've been unbelievably helpful in every way we could possibly imagine. And the commissioner, I applaud him for his attendance at most of our meetings, so that's been great. But just to give you, do I switch the slides here? Oh, whoops. Thanks, Amy. Okay, thanks. As the commissioner said, the committee's looked at a lot of issues over the last few years, and I just wanted to highlight 3 of them that we've done recently. We did a great examination of Parks and Rec. This has resulted in increased signage, easier to contact, and more rapid addressment of several issues that citizens may bring to the fore in front of Parks and Rec, to the 311 number, and I think we've helped in that regard. But again, it's been the county staff that's implemented this stuff, and they've done a wonderful job. We're currently looking at some of the issues on the sports complex that were a problem in the construction, and hopefully address those so they're not a problem in the future. And I want to get to the last one, which I'm going to address now, the transportation management services and engineering. This was a project that was brought to us because we've looked at the management of transportation engineering, and they presented to us many in many instances, and productivity produced a report that analyzed whether we should contract out some of these services or source them in-house, and specifically with respect to construction, engineering, and inspection services. Just by way of background, the Transportation Engineering Division is responsible for a lot in our county that we have to be thankful for. We have wonderful roads. They're responsible for the maintenance and safe traffic operations on our roads, implementing all the capital improvement projects, including many of those that were part of the sales tax initiative, acquiring the needed property for those improvements, which is, as you know, not always easy. And the county, in terms of building roads and maintaining them, uses both contracted outsourced personnel and employee services of the county for construction engineering. Now, for reasons related to some issues, particularly the availability of qualified personnel and liability in the design phase, the design engineering is primarily outsourced to third parties, as it would not be very beneficial for us to do that in-house. But, and this is where the big but comes, the road construction projects require a certain amount of regular oversight and inspections by construction engineering and inspection teams, CEI we refer to them as. Currently, the county has 10 full-time equivalents, basically one supervisor, a couple of managers, and field inspectors. This headcount is clearly not sufficient to maintain the current roads or to do the required inspection and engineering that's required for the future construction, and we'll get to that in a minute. As part of the sales tax initiative, there's a lot of construction going on, Vanderbilt Road and others, and they require constant investigation. Now, typically, a third party would do this for 12 to 15% of the construction costs, which is a lot of money. The county's productivity reviewed the cost of outsourcing these services as opposed to using in-house staff. When we looked at just two projects that they had proposed that they could take in-house rather easily with one additional team, a team consists of 5 individuals, the cost of that additional team for outsourcing for just these two projects, the two projects as seen on the screen here, are the 16th Street Bridge Northeast, it's a surtax project. Construction is to begin this year. It will last 18 months. Following that, there's the Airport Road widenings, again, a surtax project, which was to follow 18 months later in 2026. Those construction budgets for each of those are $2.2 and $2.4 million respectively. So roughly a little over $4.5 million to outsource that, which is in the budget. To do this in-house would cost around $2 million if we could hire the people. We've talked to the staff. The staff believes they can find the people. This is not a requirement that requires specific advanced engineering training. They can hire inspectors. They can train them within a short period of time. And if we hire them internally, the project costs are expected to be about $2 million, a little under maybe. And that includes both the first-year cost of about $700,000. That would include acquiring vehicles, training, and everything. And then about a $550,000, $560,000 annual cost of the personnel, including fringe benefits and everything. So our recommendation is quite simple, that we proceed with giving the engineering department the approval, that you accept this report, and consider proceeding with one additional in-house CEI team to establish as proof of concept that this is the right direction for the county to go in at a savings of over $2 million, probably close to $2.5 million. So that's the recommendation of the Productivity Committee.
Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the report, and I don't know if staff has any comments on the potential for recruiting a team like that, but it seems to me we're talking about two projects where there's a $2 million savings on two projects. Obviously, a team would be available for other projects going forward, so the savings would be substantial. And of course, Commissioner Hall, this is one of your favorite topics on how to do things more efficiently. And
I'm loving this.
Well, Commissioner, may I add that there's a pipeline of projects that the county has that's going to keep these guys employed for a long period of time. And even if not, turnover is likely to be such that I'm sure it's not going to be an issue.
so I guess the question for staff is, can you recruit these folks? And if commission gives you that authority and get them on board and start saving some taxpayer dollars.
Good morning. For the record, Trinity Scott, Transportation Management Services Department Head. Absolutely, we'll do our best job to be able to recruit. In our particular CEI group right now, we do not have any vacancies. So we are at our full employment capacity in that specific group. I can tell you that we've been working very closely with HR to look at different opportunities as far as recruiting other than just putting our positions out. In fact, today I have a group in Immokalee at a hiring fair for some of our inspector positions and some of our maintenance worker positions. So we're working very closely with HR to try to think outside the box about how we have typically recruited.
What would be the timeline that we need to get this team on board?
So it's going to take some time to obviously have folks apply, get in through all of our background checks, et cetera. It's going to take a couple months to bring them on board. The first project was in 24 on that group. So we would want to have them on board, fully trained up by the beginning of our fiscal year, which would be October. That would also include, we would need to order equipment for them. So that takes some time as well. So typically what we've done in the past is we've ordered the equipment to determine what the lead time of that is, and then started bringing those folks on a couple months after that, so we can get them fully trained and out in the field.
Mr. Chairman, we've had a lot of discussion about staffing, and I think you just indicated that you're at full employment, but that's a number that we've set for you.
For that specific group.
Right, but that's a number we set for you. We can change that number to accommodate, obviously, hiring another team. And even if one of the projects is completed before we bring on another team, we still have a flow of projects. So the point is, Mr. Chairman, members, I think we should direct our staff to do exactly what Dr. Gottshaw has suggested, and that is to investigate, explore, bring on some teams, at least one, to go forward with Dr. Gottschall's presentation. So, I mean,
So moved.
all right, then I'll second that motion.
All right, we got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Good job, Dr. Bradshaw.
Thank you for the presentation, and look forward to the next meeting and the next topic.
Yeah, right.
And Dr. Gotcha, I just wanted to thank you too. You and I sat on a recent board over at David Lawrence Center. He's doing an awful lot of things all over the community. And in this particular case, he and I were sitting at the same table talking about mental health and a lot of really important issues. So, you know, you're doing a lot to give back to the community and come up with great ideas. So, you know, we all up here applaud you and really thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
It'll be interesting to see what the committee comes up with, the lessons learned on the Paradise Coast contracting issue. That's their next assignment.
Dr. Gotcha was saying he thought it would be a good casino, and we were like, no, no, no. Just kidding. Wrong avenue.
Chair, would you like to talk about the
I would love to go.
situation this weekend with the water?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we do have staff here in the room, and if the commissioners, if you want to, Chair, if you'd like, you have some opening comments, and then we can bring the staff up and
Sure.
have a conversation.
So what we had on Sunday, we had a low-pressure incident in North Collier that affected 3 different districts, mainly District 2, some of District 3, and some of District 5. I learned about it from some emails that I got early Sunday morning from constituents saying, we have low pressure, can you advise? So I said, stay tuned. I immediately got on the text message and found out that we did have a low pressure incident due to some valves and some automation, and then we found out that on Sunday later that afternoon that there was a precautionary boil water notice issued by the county that said, while we're taking samples, we advise you to boil your water. And that was Sunday afternoon. On Monday morning, I didn't have any update publicly. And about 1 p.m. on Monday, on the county Facebook page, there was a notice given that said the boil water notice is lifted. And I didn't see that. And so I had no notice to me. Actually, I didn't get any notice at all personally. I learned about it through emails and then me contacting people. And then this morning, Arthrex emailed saying, hey, can you let us know about this boiled water notice because, we haven't heard anything. So I got with staff and learned that the major boil water notice, the generic boil water notice was lifted with the exceptions of Arthrex and the pewter mug area because there were breaks in the line. There again, I found out because people were asking me. As of this morning, around 8 o'clock, we noticed that on the county Facebook page that the boil water notice was taken away, or that the lifted notice was taken away. Now we got Wink News saying that the county doesn't have any official thing. So here's the point. I'm not upset that we had an issue. Issues happen. I think that the way that we communicated with each other and especially the way that we did not communicate with the public needs to be changed, and that's the discussion that I would love to have.
Thank you, sir. So I see Dr. Yomez ready to come up, and perhaps he has some insight as to where a few of these anomalies occurred, and then we can diagnose where we can smooth out these communications for future events. Dr. Yomez.
Thank you. Commissioners, thank you very much for the opportunity, and Chair, you're right on. And I think there are a number of communications improvements, enhancements, and lessons learned actually toward. And I'll share with you how we can do not just better, probably better than another utility. We make best out of these experiences. So very brief, it's going to take about 3 minutes. This whole thing started with Sunday, 11:39. We experienced low pressures in our north part of the service area. And those low pressure readings were due to a surge valve at one of our pump stations. And we have isolated, diagnosed within 59 minutes. And thereafter, we went into restoration of 40,000 connections, half of the county water sewer district being restored for pressures, not only for public safety hydrants, high rises, but also hydrants. So we were back and operational within 60 minutes. And when you look at close to 80 square miles, we're trying to figure out what happened, where the low pressure is. We're trying to figure out if there are water main breaks. We're checking our 5 different substations, and we're checking our SCADA, all hands on deck. So I want to thank our water director, Howard, and our distribution manager, both of them best of the best we can find in the state. Their team did tremendously well diagnosing, identifying the root cause, and getting the system up and running in 69 minutes. So I just want to make sure that as our governing board, your team is on it, getting it fixed, and with benchmarks created for the utilities elsewhere, how we can go after it and fix it. Having said that, we had to issue precautionary boil water notice because of the fact that most customers experience low pressure. Some customers on the high rises, second floor, third floor, because of the pressure drop, they experience no water. So we got reports, and we got our SCADA readings. Based on that, we made the judgment call conservatively. What traditionally what would be boil water notice being much more targeted area, we made it broader. And that's being conservative on our part, making sure that public health and safety and water is safe. In the process, we were collecting 100 QA/QC samples, and 100 QA/QC samples were analyzed overnight, and every single one of them passed that drinking water is safe. So we issued press release and social media notifications that the first incident started at 11:39 a.m. Sunday, ended 12:26 Sunday, resulted in no compromise in public health safety, including our fire response. Now, what happened thereafter, we had 2 water main breaks. This is after all this happening, we're restoring the system. We had 2 water main breaks. And one was on Creekside water main break on Sunday night. And our crews were there, stabilized it, isolated, and fixed the water main break Sunday night, and issued typical boil water notice. That has its own cycle because of the fact that when you do laboratory analysis, incubation period for bacteriological analysis is about close to 24 hours. You have to wait 24 hours to get it. And we do it in-house so that it's as fast as we can get it so that customers are knowledgeable. Then second force main break happened on US 41, and that water main break happened on Monday morning, early morning. So we have crews, all hands on deck, fixing second water main break. And the general thought is that we had a dry season, thanks to El Nino. Now we have the dry winter season turned into wet season, which is one of the root causes for water main breaks due to groundwater levels. Having said that, so that kind of paints the picture in terms of in the field, our operations. Let's move to communication. Commissioner, you're right on. When you have a close proximity on events, big part of customers, 40,000 connections, over 120,000 customer base, being notified that they are on boil water notice. And we're lifting boil water notice. But then we got these 2 isolated areas driven by water main break, continues to have boil water notice. So there is overlap, and there are lessons learned. And I think that moving forward, if we have this incident, we will make sure that our communication in all areas, press releases, social media, and one other thing that I learned personally, that we need to, oh, by the way, I wanna compliment our county manager, Ms. Patterson. She has been 24/7 in communication with me, as much as up to speed I am. But I think that given the time compression, gives us such a limited time to clarify things. So we have one thing posted, something else is happening, we're posting it, close proximity. No excuses, we'll do better. But what I want to share with you is what I got from Commissioner Hall's, that was impressive to me, frankly. And I think it's a learning point for staff, for us to be able to help your assistants, because of the fact that what I have seen Commissioner Hall did is just exceptional. He just sent an update on his newsletter. And his update included clarification as soon as he got the information from our county manager, including the map. And then reference from that map updates link in terms of when boil water notice is going to be lifted. So I want to include that in our, frankly, lessons learned. We didn't think about it, but I think that we can do that for any district when we have boil water notice. We'll be reaching out to you through our county manager so that you have all the information you need to communicate specifically with your districts, in addition to our means and methods communicating to the public through press releases. So that's my brief summary. And if there are any other questions, I would be more than happy to answer.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. I
Yes,
think
sir.
there again, I think we're extremely pleased with how the county responded to the actual problem and fixed it as fast. I mean, that's impressive. But what's not impressive is how we communicated to the public. Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there are two elements of communicating with the public. Obviously, what Commissioner Hall did with the newsletter certainly got the word out to an awful lot of people. And so keeping people informed on what has happened and what the processes are, that's incredibly important. And I know that's a lesson learned. And this is not a criticism. I think staff did a wonderful job in responding to all of these problems. But there's two elements to communication. The first is when people have the problem and they start calling to let us know that there's a problem. And I think that's where there may have been a breakdown. I got a phone call from Sue Filson saying that people are calling her because they're dialing some numbers for the county and there's no response. They're dialing cell phones and there's no response. And so I got a hold of a couple folks, including Dr. Yilmaz and Amy Patterson, to say there's a problem, people can't get through, what's going on. Now, by that time, everybody knew you guys were on it. But I think we need to find a way to improve the communications potential for people that have the problem and they call in. There should be an answer. And our 311 system isn't operative, I think, over the weekends. But something like that where people can call in, they know there's a number to call in, maybe it's part of 311, where they know to call in and there'll be an answer. I think that was really the most frustrating thing for people. And I got a bunch of letters, I'm sure everybody did, that they called different numbers, a variety of different numbers, and could not get any response. And that was what was really frustrating for a lot of folks. So I don't know what the answer is, but there has to be some better way for people to report an emergency, even if it's a whole lot of people calling in to report that.
Commissioner, absolutely, and we concur, we agree. One of the things that we need to work from an infrastructure standpoint in communications, it's not unique to our county, but there are limitations in terms of simultaneous calls coming in. If we have anything more than 100 phone calls coming in within time frame and simultaneous, they get kicked out. So that we're doing deep dive. And I think we have solution sets that already we're working on. So there are some communication infrastructure limitations that we will overcome. And I think that our 311, as well as our utility customer service, and along with what we call, when we have emergencies, we create a pool of people more than usual answering phone calls. So this incident indicated that we need to be better ready and overcome infrastructure in communication and obstacles we have in phone tree line. We received about over 3,000 phone calls within 60 minutes. It kind of tells you when you have critical infrastructure failures, it is alerting, and we're silent doers, and even 60 minutes of low pressure created over 3,000 phone calls. That's how important what we do, and that's what we need to do 24/7, 365 to sustain it. So having said that, are we ready for another 3,000-4,000 phone calls coming in within 1 hour? My answer is no. Are we gonna be ready? Working with our county manager, Ms. Patterson, we will overcome those obstacles. Once we overcome technological and infrastructure communication obstacles and routing, I think that next time around it will be much smoother, and then we'll include routing to our individual commissioner aides so that they are at the same time up to speed. Lessons learned from our Commissioner Hall.
Thanks, George. Commissioner McDaniel?
Yes, you mentioned something, Dr. George, and I really appreciate. I spoke to you personally on Sunday. Even my phone started ringing when people's water pressure dropped off or didn't have any. During your presentation, you talked, and it's something that I'd like to ask about critical infrastructure issues due to our good Lord sending more water, surface water, than we typically have? Do we have critical infrastructure issues that are that liable to natural events? We happen to have a rainier than usual dry season going on right now, and are there other things that we need to be looking at with regard to our critical infrastructure based upon that?
Absolutely, and we are. Our county manager, Ms. Patterson, during the weekend made all the resources available from EOC, and I've been in communication with Mr. Dan Summers, and we do have some means and methods and tools available there for mass notification that can be driven by a polygon in GIS so that we can have a targeted mass notification that includes phone calls and text messages to the customers registered on Collier Alert.
Yeah, you're over on communication. I'm talking about the infrastructure that we have in the ground right now that's impacted by a higher than normal subsurface groundwater issue.
I got it.
That was part of your presentation as to why the breaks were happening. Are we that susceptible to higher than normal or higher at all groundwater, subsurface groundwater
Got it.
levels?
The vulnerability is very limited,
Okay.
and usually it is where our water main pipes placed on the rocks. As you know, private development builds our infrastructure and they convey it to us. And we cannot go and inspect every foot of pipe being put on the ground. So some of them happens to be sitting on the rocks. Collier is a good example. We have a lot of breaks there when we have water events because of the fact that when you have a water main moving on the rock, there's going to be a chance that it's going to break. So, but it's limited. We know where they are, and we're ready to respond. So, short answer is vulnerability is there. We know the locations, and it's very limited.
So, and then with regard to the communications, you have been working with Dan Summers in a better methodology for communication on a greater basis.
Absolutely.
I would have heard, okay. And Mr. Chair, I do have a third item that's not related to this, but has to do with this department, so I'll bring that up after we're done talking about this circumstance.
Commissioner Castro.
Dr. George, we're talking, you brought up the alert Collier system. Even though this didn't affect my district, my phone was ringing as well as citizens were trying to get a hold of
Yes,
anybody.
we communicated with you over the weekends too.
Yeah, and my executive assistant lives in District 3, so she was affected, and I guess she had talked with Ms. Patterson and a few others, and to just get back to your comment about the alert Collier system, she had mentioned it as well. We use that for hurricanes and everything, and although we don't want to blast it out countywide, I don't need people in Goodland to know that there's a water main break in District 2 or 3, but, and maybe we don't know this answer, do we have the ability to, maybe Ms. Patterson knows this, or I see Dan Summers in the back, do we have the ability to target certain zip codes to
Yes.
send out? So, I mean, that would have been awesome, you know. I mean, we can't use Alert Collier every time somebody gets a flat tire on Collier Boulevard, but for something that affects, you know, water or maybe a controlled burn that's out of, you know, it's out of control, or a major car accident on I-75. I mean, we don't want to water down Alert Collier. We want it to be for emergencies, but, you know, this crossed over to 3 districts, and even in my district, citizens were hearing it from friends who were saying, nobody's talking to us, you know, Commissioner, can you tell us anything? So if Alert Collier, you know, we have the ability to go, these 7 zip codes, send, you know, that's just another, you know, redundant system. And it's a system that already works. When we have storms and hurricanes, you know, we have how many people signed up for Alert Collier? Lots. And so it's not going to, you know, it's going to be one of the pieces of the puzzle. But to me, when I had heard my assistant talking about that, and you just brought it up as well, I would think that would be something to pursue really, really quickly. But make sure it doesn't over inundate, you know, the county, because then people start to ignore it. Oh, there's a water main break, you know, 75 miles from me, who cares? But I don't know, I see Mr. Summers, you know, came up, so I was just curious.
Commissioner, right on. I mean, what you're saying is right on. I think that there's a balance, how fast and how often we need to use that notification system. So Mr. Summers meeting with all my directors this Friday, And he and I talked, we can establish polygons, not gonna be 100% accurate, but we will be able to, above and beyond zip code, we will be able to identify by neighborhoods what we need to send. If there's a boil water notice, we'll send it out. If boil water notice rescinded, then we'll send the notice out, and we'll give a full-scale demonstration project next to 3 events and fine-tune it as we go along. I hope that answers your question.
Does I mean, and Mr. Summers is standing behind you. Maybe he has something he wants to add, because I mean, this is a
Summers?
system that he uses quite a bit, and so could we piggyback on it for these unique instances where we want to get the word out, sir?
Commissioners, good morning. Dan Summers, Bureau of Emergency Services Director. The answer is absolutely yes. And we did, I happened to be working in the office, and I got a call from, it was not my weekend to do laundry, so I got the call from my residents and followed up accordingly and was monitoring that traffic and did check in with them. I did partially activate my staff, on which is well within my purview to do that, and we had our notification team ready. We go through a 2-step process. Just to refresh, just a couple of comments. This is a great opportunity for improvement. I've worked with Dr. George's team for 20 years, and they're awesome. And this is a good indication of how we can, again, leverage that power. We focus typically on things like weather and wildfire and hurricane. We absolutely can use this tool in a very discretionary manner to do that. We can draw polygons. It obviously took a little time for Dr. Yelmez's team to identify that polygon. When I say the polygon, those areas impacted by service. We can make that notification by text, by cell phone. Presently, right now, the state of Florida has funded and purchased for us all landlines. That is a year-to-year legislative funding. So right now, I have 100% saturation in Collier County as long as the legislature continues to buy the white pages, if you will. It's what we refer to it. So number one, we encourage people to subscribe to Alert Collier. We can send the text. The areas that we can notify, we draw that on a map, and generally it's accurate plus or minus 2,000 feet. That's pretty good because we're relying on cellular technology and some of those other things that are outside of our control. So we have a large library of pre-scripted messages. We will get with Dr. George's team, build those templates, and typically once we have the area identified, we work with the fire chief or the incident commander unless the EOC is activated. If you're under a local state of emergency, it's my discretion to pull the trigger. Dr. George, in this case, is the incident commander. That's his area of authority. Then it takes us about 15 minutes to build that, quality assure it. And honestly, we have to throttle that notification or else we'd swamp the phone system too. But we can get that message out. And in some cases, through Google Translate, we can even get second language notifications. I would just want one more plug. We have learned from the wildfire event, it's important to make the notification of the event, but it's also important to make a second notification to terminate the event. So all clear. So yes, there are those situations where you want to do more than one notification to bring termination or closure to the emergency so folks aren't calling.
Thank you, Mr. Summers. Commissioner Cowell.
Thank you, Chairman. And I guess I was lucky that, District 4 was not affected by this, but also I got the same amount of phone calls and questions asked of me throughout from Sunday on. And it makes more sense now to some clarity here after listening to Dr. George that these are actually 3 separate events that happened. And because I was questioning myself, I'm like, why do we have a boil water notice and now it's not a boil water, and it's back to a boil water notice. Now it's a different section boil water notice. So it was kind of confusing to me, myself, and that, and to the citizens, that makes it really, really confusing when we're getting this information out in that way. But now it makes a little bit more sense with the 3 separate events because he's just following protocol, that once we have an incident, we got to put the boil water notice out until we know it is safe to drink. And it sounds like that pretty much the water was always safe to drink. It's just the precautionary actions to put the boil water notice out in 3 different ways, was a result of the 3 different incidents. But I do know, I think the 252 number did get overwhelmed, and there was a lot of people that was not getting through. And, you know, in public safety, and myself with background in public safety, when people don't know what to call, they call 911. So our 911 center was actually getting some calls reference to this, even though it was just a low water pressure incident and not an actual water, you know, like they didn't witness a water main break that was actually causing some sort of safety along a roadway or something, which if that happens, yeah, call 911. Let's get it out. Let's get it out quickly. But, you know, if there's some way, I mean, I'm not that technical savvy or something, but if there's some way that when these people do call into the 252, you know, or the 311 and they're not getting through directly, that is there some sort of way the call could switched over to an automated message saying, listen, we understand because we're getting inundated. We know there's a problem, such and such error. There's just a message that gives them some relief that then they don't have to keep calling back in and keep clogging up because they got an answer or going to call 911 because they didn't get an answer. So I don't know if that's possible or not, but
Sir,
that
it's
might be an
possible,
idea.
and it's culturally, as you know from your, so we can always enhance and beef up our phone tree all the way down to 5 layers. So we got 2, if not 3 layers. So we do have on-call, but they were overwhelmed as well. So we need to have multiple tiers. This is one of those events gives us ability, as our county manager indicated, there's a lot to learn from this. And moving forward, if we have true emergency, I mean, this is one that needed to be communicated. But if there was a true emergency and our 311 is overwhelmed, our phone calls to the county system is overwhelmed, and our backup systems is not gone, the ultimate call tree is, as you indicated, 911. And our goal is not to move it to 911, handle it within. So you're right on, and we're going to work on it, and there are feasibilities, and we can overcome the technical and or communication infrastructure barriers so that we don't overwhelm and or burden 911 for anything other than true life and safety.
Thank you, Dr. George. Thank you.
So just to reiterate, you know, this is by no means a finger-pointing session at anybody. I thought the problem was handled amazing. We do want to learn to communicate better. So just to sum it up, you know, no one knows staff. They only know, the buck stops with each one of us up here. We're the ones that it's our fault. And so when we can't respond or we don't have the information to respond, it looks weak on our part. So I just want the public to know that it is I think I can speak for all of us. We want to solve the problem. It's our desire to be informed and to let them know what they can expect. So just to sum it up, the breakdown in communication to us, we can learn from. The 311 system being overwhelmed, we can learn from. We can do something about that, especially on weekend. You know, I love the fact what Commissioner LaCastro said. We don't want to water down the alert Collier, but we want to be able to utilize it, and I think that's wise. I think another thing that we can learn is to update as we go along. Even though we don't have any information for the solution, we can update that information, letting the public know we're well aware, we're working on it. This is what's we've taken water samples. It takes 24 hours. Just some form of updating the public. You know, we handled the problem in 60 minutes. But when you're at home and you don't have any water pressure, you have no idea how long that's going to last. And when you can't get through, when every phone call you call is not operating, you can't get an answer, you call the commissioner, they don't know what's going on. That's alarming to the public. So we can learn by updating on a regular basis. Even though we don't have updated solution information, we can still update them on the process. I think that's important to the public. I think that's one of the main frustrations that they had. And then I love the fact that we can utilize the alert Collier, that the polygon we can isolate the areas with a polygon, send out messages to communicate. So I think it was a great conversation. I think everyone has the desire to learn from this and get better. And if anybody else, Commissioner McDaniel.
And this is off subject, but it has to do with communication with customers. We have a system in place that monitors water consumption by individual customers, but it's lagging. It's sometimes 2 and 3 weeks or a month old before a customer gets a bill. And I have a circumstance specifically with a friend who has a home who experienced a leaky valve, and we're consuming close to 100,000 gallons an hour. And then we're they didn't know until their bill came, and then they were a month and a half behind and had consumed well in excess of 1 million gallons of water. So my request is, while we're looking at how we communicate with our customer base, please let's shorten up that time frame to trigger the system to tell us to get in contact with a particular customer. We have a system in place that monitors excess water consumption, but alert somebody to alert that customer to allow them to be able to make adjustments interimly and not wait for their bill, and then in turn put them in a litigious circumstance with a contractor. This particular folks had a new pool installed, and there was a valve that was malfunctioning, and they weren't aware of it for close to in excess of 30 days. So if you would please, I'll give you specifics offline as to where that actually occurred, but if you would please add that into the repertoire of communication with a customer base. That's as important, I think, as a mass communication.
Thank you, Commissioner. And you're right. The current system we have is smart meters. And by hour, we know our customers, what they consume. We have the historian that we compare to. And if there's a significant delta, we do give credit back to our customers in 3 different ways. There are 3 tiers. Board has authorized me as department head up to certain amount, so you don't see those reimbursements to our customers. And there's a up to amount my county manager approves. You don't see those because they are empowered and delegated adjustments, but they are lagging indicators. And we're dealing with that probably 2-3 times a month routinely. Now, what I did hear from you, Commissioner, just for the governing boards and boards information, we have 3 full-scale demonstration pilot projects designed to be more leading indicator as a smart meter and be able to see the consumption and alert our customer service. And we go back to our customer and saying something is going on there, and let's look at it. So we're doing that on a limited basis, but there are so many technologies out there. Before we standardize it, we're going through that process. But right on, and appreciate the feedback.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks. County Manager?
Thank you, Commissioners. We'll definitely work with you both as the board and individually on ways to continue to improve these communications. This was a weird and evolving situation. Even my mom called me saying that she didn't have any water, and yeah. So anyway, we endeavored to do better. And when my mom doesn't have water, obviously that's a serious emergency. She's 88, so I'm surprised she wasn't one of the ones calling 911. Just kidding, Mom. Anyway, with that, are we ready to move along to the next agenda item? Okay, Troy, that brings us to public comment.
Public comment on general topic. We have 1 registered speaker at this time, Robert Thurston.
Good morning, Commissioners. Hello, my name is Robert Thurston. Today marks my 8th appearance before the Collier County Board of Commissioners on Collier TV. As always, these presentations are meant to be polite and informative. I'm highlighting the deep state's targeted individual program. I'm not here today to talk about wetland conservation or about building a new parking garage. I'm here to talk about freedom from government tyranny. Without freedom, these other things don't really matter as much. There's corruption going on here right under our nose. I'm here to tell you about something that went on that should have never gone on. This room we're in is a place where people come to solve problems. Some problems seem unsolvable. What would you do if a Navy SEAL sniper who you once knew was using the targeted individual program and his connections to the highest U.S. offices in the land to try to destroy your life as well as other innocent American lives on a daily basis? In fact, what if this same Navy SEAL had actually made several attempts on your life? And you told the police, politicians, lawyers, the Department of Justice, the FBI, activists, civil rights groups, and local and national reporters, and next to no one did anything to help. No single person you know had the clout or will to stop this Navy SEAL. Faced with that situation, what would you do to try to save your own life and end the targeting? Would you organize your notes and write up many speeches to go on community TV? Would you hope someone hears your story and releases the secret government files to the public that details and explains your targeting? Would you use community TV to have your name removed from phony terrorist watch lists you know you are on? My solution to this problem has been to try to create new laws. Where the system is corrupt, we the people have the chance to correct it. To create the new law, I need to give examples of what happened. I've identified Collier Sheriff Kevin Rambosk as deep state, a designation that should lead to his removal from office. In past meetings here, I've spoken of the crimes Rambosk has been committing against me since 2010. In 2022, Rambosk sent another deputy to my home. The deputy had opened a postal package of mine and was hand-delivering it to me. He opened it without a warrant, without probable cause, without explanation. And what did Rambosk find in my package? It was a box of good quality coronavirus masks I had bought to protect myself and others. You have to understand that this is spiritual warfare, all ultimately designed to provoke the target into lashing out so the Navy SEAL or Rambosk can rush in and quickly arrest, or worse. It's a setup. Rambosk hacks into my cell phones and computers often and harasses me when I go out based on his findings. Rambosk makes no apologies and offers no remorse, instead hoping to sweep it under the rug. How can Naples hold itself up as a fair and honest place to do business when your head law enforcement official is wrapped up in this illegal torture program involving spying and unlawful harassment against law-abiding citizens?
Thank you, Mr. Thurston.
That's all the speakers we have on this item, sir.
Commissioners, with the items 9A and 9B being continued to the second meeting in February, that brings us to our add-on item 10C. This is the recommendation to approve acceptance of approximately 100 donated air purifiers from Carrier Air and direct staff to implement a program for distribution to Collier County nonprofit organizations by application, with priority given to healthcare facilities and organizations that offer short-term or long-term residential services. This was brought to the agenda at Commissioner Saunders' request, and I will hand it over to him for the background.
Thank you. As I said earlier, I don't really like adding things without some notice in advance, but this came up rather suddenly. A gentleman that I've known for a long time is a representative doing some work with Carrier Air Conditioning. And Carrier has a partnership with another company that produces air purification equipment. They install these in hospitals and other institutions. They have very large units that connect with the air conditioning and all of those types of things. But they also have a very small portable unit. It's about 3 feet tall, maybe 2 feet wide, and it is very effective in purifying air in, say, a room of maybe a little smaller than this room. And they have they're donating a large number of those to the state of Florida, and they're sending 80 to 100 of those to Collier County if we're willing to accept them. The Salvation Army will take probably about half of those, maybe a little bit more. And then my thought was that we have a lot of not-for-profits that do a lot of good community work that involve a lot of people. For example, St. Matthew's House, the shelter for abused women. And if there's a way to assist those types of not-for-profits to make sure that people coming to their facilities are safe from viruses and other bacteria that circulate in the air, that this would be a good thing to do. And so what I'm asking the board to do is simply accept the donation and then assist in the distribution of those to the Salvation Army and then also to other not-for-profits. As County Manager Patterson has indicated, staff could work some sort of a program out. So I think this is a good news item, and I'm just asking the board to accept the donation.
Make a motion?
I'll make that as a motion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Second.
A second. So we have a motion and a second to accept these items and distribute them. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, that brings us to item 11A. That is a recommendation to direct staff to advertise an ordinance amending Ordinance 2002-63, which established the Conservation Collier program and bring back the ordinance at an advertised public hearing. This Ms. Jamie Cook is here to start the presentation. She does have some recommendations that were, as I advised in our meetings yesterday, from the Conservation Collier Land Acquisition Committee that we're going to put on the record for the board's consideration. Ms. Cook.
Good morning, Commissioners. Jamie Cook, your Director of Development Review at Growth Management Community Development. Back in the fall, you had directed staff to amend the Conservation Collier ordinance, in part to make the acquisition process faster. Back in December, we had, so the County Attorney's Office had drafted much of the language that was in the backup material for today. We presented that to the full CLAC at their December 6th meeting. They did have some concerns, wanted to be able to take a look at some of the language and provide any recommendations. So we did have a subcommittee meeting with their Ordinance Policy and Rules Subcommittee right before Christmas, and then their recommendations were presented to the full CLAC at the January 3rd meeting. So today, we are here today to provide some of those updates to you, as well as get some recommendations from you, including the staff and CLAC input on those changes. So there's several cleanup and minor changes throughout the ordinance, but we wanted to highlight the major changes that would affect the program moving forward, especially in terms of acquisition. So the major ordinance changes are within the funding of the Conservation Collier program section. There are two major changes in the properties that are eligible section. One in the nomination of acquisition proposal section, and finally 3 major changes in the procedures for selection and purchase. And all of these changes were done at the direction of the board from last fall. So the first major ordinance change combines the acquisition fund and maintenance fund sections of the ordinance. But so the board would essentially be codifying that each year through fiscal year 2031, the board will set the millage rate, which you already have in your purview to do. Additionally, instead of the set percentage rates that are in the current ordinance of 75 to acquisition and 25 to the maintenance fund, the board would have the authority to set the split each year during the budget. Traditionally, the interest from the maintenance fund has been paying for all of the maintenance activities within the preserves each year. And with the changes this year, any maintenance activities will actually be drawing from the principal within the account. So by allowing the maintenance activities to be paid for solely by the interest every year, if and when the program does eventually sunset, there would still be money in that maintenance fund that if there were any acquisition purchases or interest in purchasing land, the principal in that maintenance fund would be able to acquire that acquisition. That's not right. CLAC did have concerns with this policy, but staff would recommend that we would work with the budget office each year to provide a recommendation to you to set those percentages based on any potential acquisitions that we know may be coming forward, as well as proposed maintenance activities. In the properties eligible for acquisition and maintenance section, the first of the major changes is that the board had directed us to look at alternative options for acquiring land, including through conservation easements as well as the TDR program. At this moment, staff would recommend leaving this item out of the ordinance as it's not consistent with our growth management plan, which currently states the county is not eligible to participate in TDR programs. We've kind of discussed this internally with staff, and we estimate that it would probably cost somewhere around $250,000 or $300,000 to hire a consultant to update the growth management plan, which is a year-long process with the state, with state involvement. Then have the consultant write the policy, go through the contracts to acquire that consultant, as well as legal review. If you wanted to give us direction to take this approach and amend the growth management plan, staff would recommend at that time that the ordinance or the companion purchasing policies be updated to include things to include the processes for conservation easements as well as TDR programs. Additionally, CLAC did have some concerns.
Can I ask a question about that?
Sure.
Is it not possible then to have the acquisition of property can be in fee or by a conservation easement in the form approved by the board? If we stopped there, would that be permissible?
It would be. Staff would still request time before implementing this to develop that conservation easement policy, as that's not something that we currently have. And there would be some logistics that would need to be worked out.
That would not require a comp plan change or anything of that nature.
Correct.
And the reason I wanted to interrupt at this point, Mr. Chairman, there were two issues in this draft that I had some problems with, and this was one of them. I think we should be able to acquire conservation easements in a form approved by the board. Where I felt that there was a problem here was keeping the development rights on that property, and that's the part that is raising some concern. So if we are to eliminate all of that, I'd like to still keep the portion in there about acquisition of property can be in fee or by conservation easement in a form approved by the board. I think that's an important policy. The issue of whether we retain the development rights on that property, I think we could save that for a future conversation. But I'd like to still have the ability to have a conservation easement.
Understood.
So I'll just make that point. I'm sure we're going to get to a point of voting on this, and I'll raise it again.
Okay.
Commissioner McDaniel.
I completely concur with the ability to acquire by conservation easement. It's just, it's always been my want to have those property rights inured to the benefit of the county and not be extinguished. The current language was pretty easy. Conservation Collier buys a piece of property in whatever form or format, and the development rights were extinguished. I would like for that to not happen. If in fact that requires a comp plan amendment at some particular point in time in the future, then we need to address that as we go forward. But I don't want the development rights to be extinguished.
Okay. And depending on where this goes, if that's something that the commission would want, we could bring back that policy. The second major change in this section is that the board may sell conservation Collier lands provided that the proceeds of the sale are put back into the program and may only be used for additional conservation Collier acquisition purchases or maintenance. CLAC did not agree with the addition of this language as they did not feel that the characteristics of the land or quality of the land would change such that the lands would no longer qualify for the program. However, it's important to note that very similar language is already elsewhere in the ordinance, that the board has the authority to sell land, so staff doesn't necessarily have an opinion either way if this is included in a second section of the ordinance.
I have a question right there. So if we have, I don't know if on the Veterans Memorial Phase 2 extension, is there some conservation Collier property that's in that plan? Or
Yes, where the road is going through. The road right-of-way was already excluded from the Conservation Collier property, but there is some stormwater considerations that roads will need to utilize Conservation Collier lands
I guess
for.
my question would be, if it wasn't excluded, and that would be the case where we had some Conservation Collier property that we needed to sell, I understand wanting the money to go back into the program, but in that case, it could be used for that road, that infrastructure that's for the public good, instead of just being used however we want to. That would just be a comment that I would raise. Commissioner McDaniel?
And my comment has to do with I did read that there were opportunities for dispositions by this board. I just want a point of clarification that minimum equivalency is provided for what we paid for it in the first place. I don't want it to just be deemed excess property and dumped off at a loss.
Understood, and I believe staff would feel the same way.
It doesn't say that in here, though, so it just says we have the right to sell it, which is nice, but I would like a provision of a minimum equivalency before it's even considered.
Okay.
Viva appreciation. Commissioner LaCastro.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when it comes to that, I would just like to see a lot of specificity and have it be the exception, not the rule. I think, people that are supporters of Conservation Collier, the expectation is when Conservation Collier buys land, we've even said it up here before, we buy it in perpetuity, we buy it in perpetuity. So this would be for very unique circumstances, and it'd be the exception, not the rule. So the verbiage here, it has to be very clear. Not ambiguous, that it looks like, there's always a loophole, there's an end around, and, we're proud of ourselves, we just bought some Conservation Collier land, but, there's always something we can do down the road. So if you're gonna bring something back to us, clarity is very important here, is just, my, and that it's the exception, not the rule. It's for something very, very unique that we could not foresee, not to make it sound like at our discretion, we can sell Conservation Collier land because we want to build an apartment complex. And I know that's not what it would be. But, as Commissioner Saunders always says, words matter. And people who don't have as much depth and knowledge of Conservation Collier as you do, and as we try to have, we don't want them to read it for the first time and it looks like we just watered down Conservation Collier and gave us an opportunity to sell land that down the road that program purchased. So that's
Well said, and I'm pretty sure that's what our intent is here.
Absolutely,
Mr. Saunders?
yeah.
Thank you, and this may be a question for the county attorney as well. So we have this language about selling the property, and I agree, we should always maximize that price, and obviously, the property can't be sold unless it comes to the board, so the board will have that information. But I want to turn to page 4, section 6, because there's some language that is impacted by that, and that language deals with the use of the funds that go into Conservation Collier. And it says, at the direction of the board, funds may be transferred between two funds, which we've talked about, or used for any other county purpose. And I do have an objection to that language, but assuming that language goes into this ordinance, my assumption would be no matter what we say here in terms of the proceeds can only be used for additional purchases of environmental sensitive land, there's a conflicting section that says that the money going in there can be used for any purpose. So would at least those funds be protected from being used for any other purpose, Mr. Klatskow, or does that section kind of supersede, if you will, what we just talked about in terms of the sale of property?
The intent behind this clause is what the board did during its second budget hearing, where there was allocations taken from the Conservation Collier Trust Fund. So this is simply mirroring what the board has done. And at the end of the day, sir, this is a policy, and a majority of the board can change this policy at any time. That's just the nature of it.
Well, obviously, when we get to this section, when staff gets to that section, I want to discuss this, that specific language. I know the board always has the ability to take those funds and use them for other county purposes. I understand that. But we're creating an ordinance that specifically says that, and I just think that sends the wrong message. And so we'll have some conversation about that when we get to that language. But I wanted to see if there was a conflict between those two sections.
I don't see a conflict, no.
I think what you're saying is, regardless of whether we sell property, those funds go into the Conservation Collier program, but can still be used for other purposes based on this language.
Yes.
I just wanted clarification on that.
Okay, the next change, one of the things that you had asked us to do when we expedited the process, so this change in policy would be that instead of large active acquisition lists with 20, 30 properties coming to you at one board meeting, they would be split up, so as they're ready to go, if we have 2 or 3 parcels that we're bringing to you for consideration for acquisition to begin our appraisals and due diligence, we bring them forward. So if we have 2, we bring 2. If we have 5, we bring 5. And that way, properties aren't sitting in limbo or 5 or 6 months till we have a large enough acquisition list to bring to you. The next section, the procedures for selection and purchase. Staff is recommending that additional changes be made to the initial screening criteria for acquisition, and the additions are highlighted in yellow on your screen. So previously there was only one characteristic for habitat, and many of the parcels were able to meet that other native habitat within the category. So staff is recommending using these classifications as they've been identified by the University of Florida, Florida Fish and Wildlife, and the Florida Naturals Area Inventory as important for natural resource protection. Additionally, staff is also recommending including larger tracts of land, so areas that are over 20 acres in size, as well as parcels within the target protection mailing areas as acquisition criteria. These criteria were included in discussions with the CLAC and supported by both the subcommittee and the full committee. Again, you had asked us to expedite that acquisition process. So as we updated the criteria from 6 to 9, staff is recommending that instead of meeting 2 of the criteria, parcels would have to meet 3 of the criteria to be considered for acquisition. If they were not to meet at least 3, then they would still be presented to CLAC, and with a majority vote of CLAC, they could be forwarded to you for consideration. But if there were 3, again, going back to that list that we've added, there's now 3 different habitat criteria on there, and it wouldn't be possible for it to meet all 3 of those habitat criteria. It would only be able to meet 1 as a maximum. So therefore, at the most of the 9 criteria, it could meet 7 at a max. Additionally, for acquisition, if they have 5 out of 9 criteria, and again, they would only be able to meet 7 at most, those would be forego the CLAC process and come straight to the board for consideration. CLAC did not agree with the addition of this item, as the committee felt that being heard by the CLAC provided for more transparency, provided more opportunity for public comment, and any concerns could be addressed at CLAC instead of at the board. Additionally, with some of the other items that were up for consideration to speed up acquisitions, they didn't feel that this would be necessary.
Just a quick question before you change.
Yeah.
Go back to that other. Do we have the staff internally to make the decisions about the screening process to determine 5 of 9, 7 of 9, 3 of 9, whatever the case is? How is that determination in fact effectuated?
It is done by staff internally with review of the property. They do the soils mapping and testing. They do site visits. They actually go out to look for listed species on the property, wetlands, habitats, features on the property. So yes.
And the one quick thought that I had is there a potential for the property owner who's submitting the property for acquisition to do some of that analysis in advance, that that wouldn't necessitate staff time, but could be verified should the board decide to go forward with it, that those criteria are met.
But potentially, yes. Some property owners have had wetland determinations done on the property or listed species surveys for whatever reason. And if they have, we accept those and then verify on site.
Okay.
The final item in this section for your consideration is that currently purchase agreements, once we've gone through the process, gotten an appraisal, done any due diligence, we make an offer to the property owner. If they accept that offer, then the purchase agreement goes to CLAC before it comes to you. So that does add a little bit of time before it comes to you. Staff is recommending that purchase agreements, once accepted by the property owner, come directly to you and forego CLAC. Neither staff nor CLAC had any concerns with this change. Some additional subcommittee recommendations that were not included were adding in perpetuity to the definition of management. That may potentially make properties more difficult to sell or ineligible for a sale, which conflicts with other items currently in the ordinance. The subcommittee recommended that any voting that's done, changing funding percentages, allocating monies to other purposes, or extension of the program by board decision be done by a supermajority vote, which, again, may make some of these activities more difficult depending on the composition of the board. So staff wouldn't have recommended that change as well. And then finally, during the subcommittee meeting, it was recommended that an additional criteria of lands which provide climate resiliency for drought, flooding, or wildfires be included. However, in community planning and resiliency is within GMD's purview. And upon speaking with the director of that division, basically any open space is already providing that resiliency for wildfires, drought, and flooding. So it doesn't necessarily need to be included. So our recommendation today is to obviously direct us to bring back the ordinance, which would amend the current ordinance, and as well as any feedback from you all of changes you would like us to make in the proposed ordinance beyond what I've presented today. And with that, I'll take any comments or questions.
Mr. Klaskow, in perpetuity, if the program ever was to sunset, would we have the responsibility to maintain what was purchased?
In perpetuity means 3 votes in this boardroom, so that at any time, a future Board of County Commissioners can elect to do what they wish.
Right, great, thanks. Commissioner McDaniel.
Yes, I had a comment with regard to somewhere, I did most of my notes on the numbered line ordinance adjustments. I really like that provision. It allowed me to jump around and not have to go to page and paragraph. But in and around line items 151 through 153, and this has to do with what Commissioner Saunders was talking about with the combination, if you will, of the funds to be there. Is it really requisite that we have to set a percentage on an annual basis attributable to maintenance if there is a fund?
No.
Okay, that was what I thought. And then the second part is, I think we as a board should regularly visit the aggregate fund and make sure that limitations are put upon future boards to, and I know you have an issue with us doing anything in the future, but a limitation of a minimum balance be kept in the fund for ongoing maintenance based upon the previous 3 or 5 years ongoing expenditures.
You would need to set up a third-party trustee if you wanted to implement that, to take the power away from the board.
It's an interesting perspective. my thought is, I'm not all that happy about a third-party trustee, but I think some consideration ought to be given to, similar to like it or don't, what the board did last year with regard to the utilization of the aggregate fund, both combined acquisitions and maintenance. There was a reason and a rationale for why we had averaged about 1.2, 1.5. I remember 5 years ago, the ongoing maintenance had been about $750,000 a year. And I'd like to, I would like for us to give consideration to establishing a matrix, if you will, or a calculation based upon the last 3 or 5 years' average expenditures, so that we certainly, anybody in the future that looks to maneuver money around isn't withdrawing sufficient funds that would cause us to be burdened for those ongoing expenses.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Edward Finn, Deputy County Manager. The setup of these budgets is actually fairly, it's as sophisticated as anything we do here. There's actually presently a separate fund for the maintenance side of the house. Further, that maintenance budget, in addition to including the reserves that exist there from an escrow or an endowment basis, also has the individual major preserves identified as project numbers or WBS codes. So you have cost centers, you have projects that refer to the individual preserves, and the budgets for those preserves are established every year. And certainly staff is capable of projecting those budgets out 3, 4, 5 years as necessary. And to a certain extent, they do that. That's the current structure. So it does provide for most of what you're looking for. Certainly, if we're going to lean down the endowment, then the annual revenue to support that, that picture kind of changes. And if you're looking for a sophisticated burn down approach on what's left, or some attempt to balance burn down against an annual revenue, certainly staff can do that on an annual or a multi-year basis if you desire.
Sure, we did that. We did that the last time, and it was a fairly easily ascertainable number that we put in place to just ensure that we had sufficient revenues to going forward to take care of that maintenance. So I just, if it's requisite or we have a third party, then we don't necessarily have to do that. I'm not interested in a third party at this stage. I just want that to be given consideration in the event that this ordinance moves forward and the aggregation of the fund is completed.
Commissioners, I'd spoken with each of you yesterday about the setup for our coastal zone groups. Then we do have a separate policy relative to the reserve for catastrophe for the very reasons you're describing here, different obviously for the beaches, but to be able to fund up at least a portion of a major event. So it sets a threshold that we build every year to a maximum amount. That amount used to be $500,000 a year to a maximum amount of $10 million, and that was to be used for nothing but this reserve for catastrophe. Now is $500,000 a year to a max of $15 million. So I'm certain that if we can get the board's perspective on what you think that ceiling is, that your comfort level, perhaps we can work with the county attorney to set up something like that. It's not, obviously, it could be changed by future boards, but there's a thought process then and at least a level of protection provided for that perpetuity maintenance.
Sure. And that may be a good way to go. I'm fine with that.
So the way it is right now, we have just kind of like a swag 75-25 split, and then the interest takes care of the maintenance, even though we still fund it with 25%?
It's not a swag. There's a reason for it.
No, I'm just saying that's the way it is now.
Yes, that's
just
the way
good
it
round
is.
numbers.
And that's been adjusted from previous discussions. It used to be 85-15, and then and the word in perpetuity with that reserve fund was removed because it was a misnomer that was an in perpetuity fund, but it had a burn rate, it had a limitation, it had an amount, and it wasn't forever. It was termed out based upon the available funds at that time. So we increased, that was one of the adjustments we made 4 or 5 years ago, increasing the revenue stream to attributable 25% instead of 15.
So with this ordinance change, there's no requirements, I guess, that we change anything. We just say that we have to, we set that every year. Well, Commissioner Kowal, and then we'll go to public comment.
Thank you, Chairman. Just dropped my pen down there, but that's all right. Yeah, I mean, when I was reading all this and studying this all before when we were going to the budget meetings back last year, these lines to me, I think the way it's written now and the language in here now, it gives us the ability to, because I knew the 75-25 was in the language at one point and we were kind of sticking to it. But I think with the way the ordinance is written now, if I'm not mistaken, this will give us the ability to say, all right, this is a target number in the maintenance fund, and we can get to that quicker, sooner than later, to get to that ultimate number that we can use as interest to just keep chugging along and keep the maintenance going. You know, even if it's for 1 or 2 years down the road, that maybe not as much in acquisition, but at least we'll be there and have a minimum amount. And I like the idea what the county manager was talking about. If there's a way to do that, to kind of say, all right, this is a maximum minimum that's in there all the time. You know, that I think that would help us down the road, and definitely, regardless if the program's still, you know, after 10 years is still here or not, but we'll still have the money to take care of what we have. So that, you know, I think this language in here kind of gives us that flexibility, if I'm not mistaken, correct? So, all right. Thank you.
We have 2 registered speakers, Mr. Chairman. Your first speaker is Michelle Linhard, and she will be followed by Brad Cornell.
Good morning, Commissioners. Michelle Linhard, Chairman of Conservation Collier. Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today on the proposed changes to Ordinance 2002-63. Some of the information I wrote down, Jamie already discussed with you, but the subcommittee did meet to review this, had a very robust discussion. The first item, at the sake of brevity, is Section 5 under definitions. I know the issue of perpetuity has come up. The intent of the program and the original ballot language includes the language perpetuity. And I believe that the intent of the public in terms of reaffirming this vote for this program speaks to the importance of perpetuity being retained in terms of this ordinance. The definition, a definition for conservation Collier lands has been excluded from the definition sections, and CLAC recommends that all parcels of land acquired under Conservation Collier be defined as such. Section 8, or properties eligible for acquisition and maintenance. Item 5 speaks to the sale of Conservation Collier lands, as has your discussion. The committee, as mentioned, does not support the intent or wording of this item, since the goal of the program is to retain properties in perpetuity. But to assure fairness to the public, if this is where the board wishes to go on this, CLAC's recommendation feels that there should be a threshold of criteria defined, as with acquisition. So selling properties would have some criteria, some detail established with it, which I think some of your conversation has spoken about, but I think would be very reassuring to the public in terms of ambiguity in the wording of that section. Section 12 speaks to procedures for the selection of acquisition proposals and placement on the acquisition list. The acquisition process has been streamlined. So item 2, where it was mentioned, CLAC does not support parcels of land automatically coming forward to you. Because even though the staff does evaluate them and can provide criteria numbers to us, that would eliminate being consideration. Is this property in a target protection area? What if the property coming to you is 1 acre? So coming before CLAC, it would not slow down the process, I feel, dramatically at this point in time. And I think that at that point, this section might be able to be eliminated, or the thought of that. The last item I have does speak to voting and the supermajority recommendation of CLAC. We request that the board's votes on key areas of processing, such as establishing millage rates and transferring funding between trust funds, require a supermajority of members. Information shared with the public during the voting process explain the use of tax dollars, including specific ranges, as you've discussed, for acquisition and management. Conservation Collier as a standalone program received overwhelming support. And so a collaborative process of a supermajority is what we're recommending. Thank you.
Your next and final speaker on this item is Brad Cornell.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brad Cornell. I'm here on behalf of Audubon Western Everglades and Audubon, Florida. Appreciate the opportunity to address you on this. Audubon really applauds the board for your work to fulfill the wishes of the voters who overwhelmingly want to see Conservation Collier succeed, to see land acquisition, conservation land acquisition move forward expeditiously. So we're very happy to see your work on this today and in the coming hearing if you choose to direct staff to bring this back, which we recommend you do. Couple of points I wanted to bring up about the ordinance in front of you, the draft in front of you. Audubon agrees with staff that right now the conservation easement and the transfer of development rights policies that have been included here are not fully ready to be implemented. They need work with the Growth Management Division staff and with CLAC and with the public to try and figure out how are we going to include those sorts of strategies in the setup that we have now. For instance, conservation easements typically do not allow public access. Public access is one of the hallmarks of our preserves. So we've got to sort out that conflict. And in the TDR program, TDRs, as they're referred to in the draft language, looks at the rural fringe mixed use district. But there are other sending and receiving lands throughout the county. What are we talking about in terms of transfer of development right policies as they relate to conservation land purchase? So I think we're premature in including this in the Conservation Collier ordinance. That doesn't mean that there's not value or there's not something to be explored, but I think you're premature in including those now. Regarding the purpose of the revisions to the ordinance, there are some cleanup languages here in addition to what we've just discussed, but also expedition of the process to acquire conservation lands is the primary objective here. And you've got two really good policies in here. One is to evaluate applications as they're received and bring them to you as quickly as possible rather than accumulating them in a lump. Like every 6 months or every year. That delayed unnecessarily, so I think that's a wise strategy. And the other one, which seems like a no-brainer, and you'll have heard of this before, and that is the skipping the CLAC review, the advisory committee review for contracts. Contracts, are just rubber stamped by CLAC. That delays it by a month or more. So just bring it right to you, and that's in here too. So we think that's a great strategy. Again, thank you for your work on expediting the acquisition process. We support it. Thanks.
Thank you, Brad. Do we want to take a court reporter break and then come back and finish discussion?
Yes, sir. If we have more conversation that's going to happen, which I believe it is with the board, then that's time for a court reporter break.
Let's do it. So it's 10:43. We'll come back at 5 till.
Thank you. Chair, you have a live mic.
So, do we have any discussion that we want to continue on this ordinance? Commissioner McDaniel?
We can certainly continue the discussion if it's the will of the board, but my thought process is we're voting today on whether or not to bring back an ordinance in the future for the reconsideration of Conservation Collier. And so we've got an enormous amount of suggestion from ourselves and our staff, and my recommendation, my motion is to move that forward.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor to move this forward? Aye.
Aye.
Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
I apologize. I was extremely slow on pushing the button there. I'm going to vote to move forward with the advertising of an ordinance. I have some issues with what's being advertised, and obviously we can make all the changes, but I'm going to encourage the folks that are really interested in this program to really evaluate what's advertised line by line. And let's make sure that when this comes back, if there are issues to be raised, I want to have those out there so we can raise those issues. I will have several. I mentioned a couple this morning, Mr. Chairman, so I'll re-raise those when this comes back. But I am going to support the motion.
So the motion stands, and you just, with your comments, okay, great. So all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Passes.
Thank you.
Commissioners, that brings us to item 11B. This is a recommendation to approve the McDowell Housing Partners ECOS on Collier application for workforce housing land acquisition surtax funding. Mr. Cormac Giblin, your Director of Housing Policy and Economic Development, is here to present.
Good morning, Commissioners. Again, for the record, Cormac Giblin, your Director of Housing Policy and Economic Development. We're here to bring you the first of a request to use the infrastructure surtax monies to purchase land for workforce housing. Just a little bit of a recap. The infrastructure surtax was approved by the voters starting in 2018. Of that total fund, $20 million was set aside for workforce housing land acquisition, which was deemed as one of the several community priorities that were included in the tax. Last March, we brought an application acquisition policy to you, an application review and recommendation policy. And since then, we've received 5 applications totaling over $26 million. This is the first one that's made it through that process and is before you today for acquisition. What we have is a application process that looks at all aspects of the development, from the zoning, the growth management, the environmental, the project team, the financing, the whole package. And then that application moves through your advisory committee, starting with the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. That committee voted to recommend approval at their November 28th meeting. And then further, it went to the Infrastructure Surtax Citizens Advisory Committee at their January 11th meeting. And that committee likewise voted unanimously to forward it to, that it was a validated expense. A little bit about the specifics of this property. It's about 7.3 acres. It's off of Collier Boulevard, heading south towards Marco Island, south of US 41. We had a subject matter team of experts from within growth management and other divisions review the application for, like as I said, zoning, growth management, environmental, floodplain, resiliency, all the things that you would look at when you're concerned about buying a piece of property for residential development. That a score was assigned, or a score was arrived at, and it was presented to the advisory committees. The one thing of note on this property is that it does lie in the coastal high hazard area, which is an area that is prone to evacuation and other disasters. You have competing elements in your growth management plan. You have a coastal conservation element and you have a housing element. The coastal conservation element cautions against spending public funding in the coastal high hazard area. The housing element recommends spending funding to further housing affordability throughout the county. And that's just a point to bring for your consideration. Given that, both advisory committees were made aware of that point and both voted to recommend approval. With me today, I have Mr. Pat McDowell, Mr. Chris Shear, Mr. Bill Zunneman, and Ms. Scarlett Perez from McDowell Housing Partners, and they're going to run through their application and the highlights of their presentation, unless you have any questions for me before I turn it over.
Commissioner McDaniel?
Yeah, I did have a question. But the primary question was, how long will this development be held in an affordable status? It wasn't clear in the documentation that I read.
Sure. Similar to the arrangement that the county currently has in the Ecos on Santa Barbara property, formerly known as the Bembridge PUD, the developer would do a 99-year land lease with the county and keep it affordable in perpetuity or 99 years. And we have a similar arrangement in the Golden Gate Golf Course with the developer we're partnering with there. Again, a 99-year lease. And this property would be, Collier County would maintain ownership of this land for as long as the board sees fit. So it's really up to the board how long you would like to keep it affordable, but the standard would be a 99-year development agreement.
So there would be a 99-year lease encumbering the property, and at the expiration of that, then a future board, which Mr. Klatzkow doesn't like us messing with, a future board would make a determination as to what the best utilization would be.
That'd be correct.
Okay. And then my second question had to do with being in the coastal high hazard area. Are there going to be circumstances that are requisite for additional expenses associated with that?
The developer was asked to address the consequences of being located in the coastal high hazard area. They have made some enhancements to their application to address that. I'll let them address it when they get to it. But development occurs in the coastal high hazard area in this county every day. There's
regularly, yeah. Sure. And in the only other point of clarification, and maybe they'll get to it. Forgive me if I'm asking my questions before you present, but there wasn't a specific. It said 100% affordable, and then everywhere from 30% up to 80 of AMI, but not a is there going to be flexibility allowed to move based upon some matrix of need?
The next step in this process, assuming the board authorizes us to move forward with negotiating the sale, would be that we bring back the property contract along with a developer agreement. And then in that development agreement will be the specifics on number of units at which affordability levels within the development.
Okay, so on that note, what I would like to see, and I enjoy the flexibility for housing affordability, but it needs to be done with pragmatism. It needs to be done on the premise that the need today will be different 10 years from now, as similarly as it was different 10 years before. And so I want that flexibility to be able to maneuver these developments to be able to service our community, but certainly at the same time with pragmatism based upon a need.
Understood. That's all. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to the McDowell team.
Good morning.
Morning, Pat.
Can we go to the next slide? Can we get it up right there? There we go. Okay, great. Good morning again. I know I've met some of you, but for the record, I'm Pat McDowell, and I am the founder and owner of McDowell Housing Partners, as well as the parent company, McDowell Properties. The best way to describe my company is that both companies have a singular focus, and that is to provide rental housing for workforce and senior residents of communities that we build properties in and that we buy and own properties in. We're a vertically integrated company. We have an acquisition team, we have a development team, a construction management team, an asset management team, finance, accounting. We even have our own interior design group that designs the interiors of the units, as well as designs the common areas for the community that meets the demographic need. McDowell Housing Partners is singularly focused on developing affordable housing. We currently have 1,700 units, either completed or under development. We started the company in 2019, so we're only 5 years old. That company, the main company, was started in 2004. We have 1,700 units that have been completed or under construction. Most of them are financed with low-income housing tax credits. The 3 properties that have been completed, we have 11 total properties. 3 have been completed. All of them are in Florida. One's in the Panhandle, one is in Tallahassee, and one's here in Naples, was mentioned, Ecos and Santa Barbara. The other 8 properties that are still under construction, 2 in Texas and 6 in the state of Florida. And all of those are going to be complete over the next, most of them over the next 5 months. And we have 2, one in Broward and one in Miami-Dade, that will be completed at the end of the year. My focus on building affordable housing is to provide more than acceptable places to live for people who can't afford market rate housing. And it's a passion of mine. It's something that I looked at. I've been in the business for a long time, as you can probably see. And this has become a passion of mine. And when you take a look at the communities we build, they don't look affordable. You go to Ecos in Santa Barbara and you drive by it, it looks like a Class A market rate property. And that's the kind of asset we're building. We want to build communities that our tenants have pride in ownership and pride in living there, and pride to bring their friends to enjoy the common areas over the weekend, et cetera. The parent company, McDowell Properties, buys and renovates workforce housing. We bought since 2004 over 45,000 units and approximately 170 communities. What we do is we buy a property that's older, and then we turn them around and we renovate the interior of the units, and then we renovate the common areas to make them more specific to the demographic. Demographic today is not the same as the demographic need was in 1990 or 1980. So we change those communities. Again, we make them better places to live for the workforce community. The other thing that we do in that company is we buy Freddie Mac subordinated debt. We're very close to Freddie Mac. We've bought $500 million of their debt over the last 10 years. And this, again, is all workforce housing. That debt is debt on workforce housing. So, again, the focus of the company is affordable and workforce. And the last thing I want to say before I turn it over to Chris is that partnerships are very, very important to me. I believe that you have to develop partnerships in business to be successful. And it's particularly true in the development business, I've discovered. If you don't have an engineer, an architect, a legal team, et cetera, that are really your partners, even though they're third parties, you can't get the job done. And most importantly, you have to have a partner in the community, in the county or the state that you're working in. And we are very proud of the fact that we have Collier County as a partner, because we have 3 projects now that we have ongoing, 1 complete, 2 are going to be complete, and hopefully we're going to have a 4th project to go with you. And that partnership, to me, it's extremely important in terms of the value and the way I look at the business world. And hopefully we can continue that partnership even beyond the project we're talking about today. So with that, I'd like to just turn this over to Chris, and he'll talk about the project.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Very happy to be here. We've been at this project. Chris Shear, for the record, COO of McDowell Housing Partners. We've been at this project for a little over a year now. We've brought it in front of staff. We brought it in front of the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. We've submitted it for funding to the state of Florida now a couple times. And there's some good news on that end that I'll be sharing within the presentation. But we've heard the concerns. We certainly know the need at this county right now. We had our ribbon cutting for Ecos on Santa Barbara, which is our first partnership with the county. Very similar to this in terms of the land conveyance. And we're well into the hundreds on our waiting list at this point. So I think the objective here is to deliver and deliver quickly, because the shortage of housing is only continuing to grow. So just briefly through a few slides on who we are. Pat covered a lot of the basis. We have 3 projects under construction here. We've been working in the county since late 2019. And so we've been able to secure funding largely from Florida Housing Finance Corporation and on Ecos on Santa Barbara in partnership with the county itself to develop these 3 properties. Total, we have 402 units. The first one is a family development. The second two, Ecos Allegro, Ecos Cadenza, are both senior developments. They'll be dedicated to a 62-plus population. They have a mix of income ranges going up to 60% of the area median income. And Ecos on Santa Barbara is more of a workforce product that services residents of the county up to 80% of the area median income. And that is what we're proposing with the current project, is to continue to serve a larger band of incomes to try to get more of a focus on your essential service workers and your county staff, and all the hardship we're seeing and continuing to hear as we are leasing our assets at this point. A couple nice pictures. We like to show this one off. So this is Ecos on Santa Barbara. We had the pleasure of hosting a couple of commissioners at this ribbon cutting just a couple weeks ago. 82 units. As mentioned, we have 7 county employees living there, and the only constraint there in servicing your employees and other essential service workers is just the limitation of the size of the development itself. Huge waiting list. It leased up almost immediately, and we're in the process of just physically moving the last few folks in at this point. Ecos Allegro and Cadenza, this is right behind Physicians Regional Hospital, and it's 320 units. It is in partnership with the Collier County Community Land Trust, which was established, not that long ago, I would say within the last 5 years, to work in conjunction with the county to ensure that properties remain affordable, that there's a conduit for the county's mission that aligns with the land trust to continue the development and high-quality development at that. Something unique about these projects, and this is what we really strive to do, is not only deliver housing. We know there's a need for that. You could build a very inferior product and still have a lot of demand. The intention here is to provide really a quality of life that you're not going to get at a market rate housing community even. And that comes with services, particularly in the senior realm. So we've partnered with the County Senior Citizens Nutrition and Activity Program, and we dedicated a space, built out a sort of a mini kitchen, coolers, sink, et cetera. They're going to be providing daily meal services at the property for our seniors, and it may even be open to the public. I'm not sure on that fact, but it's going to be another outlet for the county service to be implemented, and most of our seniors are going to be taking advantage of that. I think that's a very pointed service that we typically don't see, so we're really excited about that one. We also have a partnership with Healthcare Networks of Southwest Florida. We've dedicated an exam room. We'll have a practitioner there on a regular basis. They'll be coming in doing basic immunizations, exams, anything that can be serviced. It's their largest, I think, Medicare, Medicaid provider in one of the largest in the state, but particularly in this market. So we're looking forward to being able to service not only our residents with housing, but with health and wellness as well. What really comes down to today that we think we've demonstrated and we've continued to look at is, let's talk about the timeline and execution. We've been in the county working here for about 4 years now. We've learned a lot. We have the experience and the ability to execute. And I think that's where, looking at other projects, every county is unique. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of different processes and procedures you got to be familiar with. And we have this distinct advantage of being able to move a project forward with that knowledge and with that rapport with your staff. We're familiar with the lease agreement itself, which is a heavy document that could be negotiated over many months. I think that would be expedited in this process, given that we've already negotiated one that we're utilizing on the Bembridge parcel. In addition, we're very familiar with the neighborhood engagement process. It's a tough thing to navigate, but we understand the importance of that, getting the community involved, looking for feedback from their end. We want this to be part of the fabric of the community, not just another building with another name on it. We've learned a lot also on the construction and design side. This is a tough market to build in, especially coming out of COVID. It was probably the hardest construction phase that I've ever seen in my career, and many will say, that's ever been experienced. We had labor issues, we had material supply issues, a lot of subcontractor issues, and we've learned a lot of lessons. So I think all of that is really part of how we can improve upon what we've done already and effectively meet a timeline that's much more expedited than you would otherwise see with a new developer coming in proposing a similar project. So we hope you take that into consideration. The last thing is our ability to mitigate risk. So we have access to various insurance programs. Insurance is a very interesting market right now. Frankly, we all know it's skyrocketed, and I don't see it coming back down anytime soon. So there's a lot of competing interest, a lot of headwinds, and just wanted to talk a little bit about our ability to mitigate those and our ability to execute if we move this deal forward. So we talked about the location. As you can see, it's right off of a major commercial intersection. We're about a quarter mile away from 41 from Tamiami Trail, next to a Walmart, next to a Publix, which is really two of the biggest amenities you can have in a workforce housing community people will be using on a daily basis. Development program. So I wanted to hit on our current mix. There is some flexibility in here. However, we've really tried to utilize this development was really taken in consideration of the new Live Local Act, Senate Bill 102. And so what we've done to really optimize the site that allows us to be efficient still so we can afford to actually build the product is devised a 7-story single building with a separate clubhouse and all amenities, within the 7 acres. We have a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. Those rents do range from 33 to 80%, but one thing I wanted to stress to Commissioner McDaniel's question is that we are trying to service more 80% units, and it's not just 80%. It's anyone 80% or below. So if you're at the 50% AMI level, you could still qualify for an 80% unit, but the maximum would be an 80% income level, and that changes yearly by HUD's designation. But the idea is to have more 80% units, whereas we had a handful of 80% units at Ecos and Bembridge. We're proposing 40% of those units be at 80% AMI. So it allows us to serve more of our essential service personnel who are typically between that 60 to 100% AMI range. In terms of the financing, we've been looking since we've been active in this market, scratching the surface everywhere and looking for opportunities, and it's been very constrained by the fact that the county itself doesn't have these geographic areas that get a boost in our financing program through the tax credit program. You just look at these quick maps, you can see the areas that are shaded are the areas that get that boost, and the one on the left we just happen to be in, that's a qualified census tract. The areas on the right, those are difficult development areas, and they're largely rural areas or very developed areas already where there virtually is no land or no land that we could afford. Going on to the current zoning, as I mentioned, we are utilizing the Live Local Act. So this property is zoned C3, has a small portion of MH, which is the mobile home park. Very small portion, and we've been working with your zoning staff to determine how we can utilize that site to provide us with flexibility and more efficiency, but not have to go through an extensive rezoning process, and I think we have some great feedback on that right now. So this project can move forward with administrative approval through the site development permit process under the Live Local Act. So this could move very quickly through that process and not have to be subject to a lengthy rezoning public hearing process. I hit on this already, so I'm just going to skip over this slide, but just some other facts on the current zoning and SB 102. So the request today, we are here asking for a partnership similar to what we're undertaking already, whereby the county acquires the land and leases it back to us. And we're also asking for the traditional services, incentives that the county provides for workforce and affordable housing. So I think that's an expedited permit process that allows us to, I believe, move a little quicker through the process, as well as the impact fee program. I won't hit on this too much, but we do meet all of the surtax funding goals as they were outlined within that solicitation or within that program and policies. And some of the features of the project, we would propose to run the lease through the land trust as well, which gives us some additional incentive as a land trust has opportunities to access capital. They have opportunities for ad valorem exemptions on the land portion of the property through Live Local. The other ones are just basic features that you'll hit. So I will I will move on to the great news, and this is fresh off the press. So as of just last week, there was a solicitation for their $150 million that the Live Local Act has now granted to Florida Housing to administer for the development of workforce housing. And so Florida Housing administered a competitive process that had over 70 applications and selected, as this time, preliminary recommended funding for, I believe, 13 of those developments. We were one of the recipients of that preliminary recommendation. So that basically solves the math problem on the financing. Now, we're subject to market changes, we're subject to cost of construction, but overall, that solves the problem along with this surtax allocation and the traditional incentives that the county offers. We have the ability to move this project forward as fast as we can and as fast as the county will work with us to move it forward. So we're very, very lucky here. There's a process that goes through a formal approval. We'll go in front of the February 2nd Board of Directors for Florida Housing. And then there's an appeal period. We do this a lot. Not to say that things don't happen, but we're very confident that our application will stand and we will not be subject to an appeal, which means that we will have an invitation to underwriting probably within the next couple of months. And that's really just more of a formality to start underwriting. We're already working on the development. We're already working with financial partners to align our debt and our equity and sell our tax credits. So we heard a little bit about the conservation and coastal management element, and I think this is something we heard feedback on. We got some feedback on a few different areas, and I want to just talk about how we've thought about that and address that feedback, because I think it is conflicting, as Cormac said. You know, we do have policies to promote development of workforce housing, and then you have policies that also, you know, seek to mitigate and to be prudent on your approach to development within coastal hazard areas. And so in this case, we have spent time working with Mr. Summers at the Bureau of Emergency Services. My understanding is that this project in particular has went through their risk assessment, risk analysis, and did not trigger any concerns on that end in terms of being prohibited or not being able to be mitigated. So at this moment, we do have support from emergency services. There's a couple things that were brought up in those conversations. We will be committing to put in a generator on the development. The site is in a flood zone. That site will be elevated to a level that takes it 1 foot out of the flood zone at the base flood elevation. So all of our collateral, all of our residents, belongings, everything in the building will be raised out of the flood zone. The building will be CMU block, will have impact windows. You know, all major systems, you know, will be in accordance with all of the strict requirements that, you know, the state of Florida also implements through their building code, but also here in Collier County. You see a lot of development in the coastal areas. There's natural ways to mitigate it. And if you look at the location of where we're at, just from a practical standpoint, we're a quarter mile away from Tamiami, which, and Collier, you can go any direction in the county very quickly. And so in addition to that, and this is just a matter of practice with all of our developments, we have notices, we have regular meetings, especially during hurricane season, to notify our residents of emergency evacuation plans. We post that information regularly to make sure everyone is aware, especially in the senior populations, which this isn't, but nonetheless, it's important to us as well as you, because these are our clients. At the end of the day, our residents are our clients, and we need to make sure that their safety is first and foremost. So going back to the CCME, regarding the public funds, I've kind of put the puzzle together in this sense, but it looks like under state statute section 163.3177, it requires the goals and policies and objectives of the county CMME to limit expenditures that subsidize development in coastal high hazard areas. And that's sort of the language that could be open for interpretation. And so we ran this by our land use council at Nelson Mullins, large attorney overseeing, you know, a number of our developments, is active within the county, is active within the western part of the state. And what we discovered is that, you know, the limit is really that language in and of itself is part of the state statute, which then gets picked up in, I think, every comp plan that's developed on a local basis. So that is boilerplate language that's adopted in comp plans throughout the state, throughout many jurisdictions. It's up to the county, in this case, to determine if there's any additional mitigating factors that they want to impose in that limitation of public funds. And that's where our conversations with emergency management services came in. It does not prohibit public expenditures from development, but it does say and I have the letter I'm happy to distribute to the group or anyone of interest. You know, there's often goals, there's often objectives that are further stipulated within the policies of a local government and include specific design requirements or mandatory mitigation measures that must be taken for developments in a high hazard coastal area. And so that's where we're happy to continue that conversation. We have some thoughts, as I had already laid out, as to how we see that being done practically, and we hope that that's not a limiting factor here. We think the development site, albeit within a coastal high hazard area, is still very accessible and provides for the safety of our residents over the long run. In terms of funding, after I shared the fact that we are in good position to be moving this deal forward from a financing perspective, we are full speed ahead. We're going to work as fast as we can and we can with county staff. I think this project, to not belabor the timeline, we could put a shovel in the ground here within 12 to 16 months, I think is a very realistic time frame. So here's a concept site plan. Just gave this, I guess, for last. This is subject to change. Again, it's a concept. One of the things we're thinking about, we have this great amenity with Henderson Creek, which actually runs all the way out to the intercoastal. And we feel like it's got real potential to provide some sort of public access, to provide some sort of amenity not only to our residents, but also to the public in general. So that's things we'll be working with your staff on and trying to come up with a plan, again, that not only creates a development, but adds some benefit to the public realm as well. I am available for questions. My team is here if there's any questions, but I appreciate your consideration this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scheer. Commissioner LaCastro.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first off, congratulations and thank you to you, Cormac, for all your hard work and your team, and to you, Chris, and Mr. McDowell. You know, when we were there helping to cut the ribbon on Santa Barbara, there's nothing low income about that facility. I mean, you put a lot of bells and whistles into it, and that's what we're looking for in this community. I think we all have a challenge with citizens at times separating rumor from fact, where they all scream they don't want low-income housing by their neighborhoods, but they don't understand it. It's just a high quality apartment complex that has a percentage of units priced below AMI, as we all know, but sometimes citizens don't get that message. A question I meant to ask you that day, and then I have a deeper dive. How long are the leases that those people have at ECO? So are they a year, 12 months, or are they longer? Could they sign longer leases?
1-year leases, but due to fair housing, they have the opportunity to stay. The new lease will be put into effect, and those leases are scrutinized, you know, by our lender investor in the state. They have some fair housing regulations, so they're not, they cannot be displaced, put it that way.
But we will catch if somebody qualifies and signed a 1-year lease, and then all of a sudden they got a new job at Arthrex and they're making 6 figures, then they wouldn't qualify to be there, and then they wouldn't be able to. I mean, you have measures in place to catch that, correct?
Well, surprisingly, because of fair housing, if that situation were to occur, we still could not displace them.
Okay.
They're subject to a different payment schedule, rent schedule.
Okay.
But
Okay.
we could not displace them. So
Okay.
this
Because, I mean, I know you got hundreds on the wait list, so my question is, when are we ever going to get to those people? And the only way you could get to them is if somebody moved out, you know, maybe they moved and took a job somewhere else, you know, or something else in between. Because people that are on the wait list have sent, because this is in my district, have sent me a note and said, you know, I'm on the wait list, but I don't think, you know, it's a joke. I'm number 417 and there's 82 units. So,
yeah, I mean, that's the unfortunate situation we're facing in this county, is that the demand just greatly exceeds the supply.
I like how you talked about lessons learned. So I guess the question I was going to end with was, when I spoke with the county staff and they they spoke about that complex on Santa Barbara, and we finally got to the finish line, but there was a lot of hurdles, a lot of lessons learned. You have some projects in the pipeline coming up. Can you give us the short version of some of those lessons learned? Because the thing that struck me is the timeline to get to the finish line seemed incredibly long. And I know some of it is the state and funding and things that maybe are beyond your control, but I guess where I'm looking for the super short answer is if there's anything here at the county that was slower than it could have been, and not because people are negligent, but like you said, we all learn lessons. These are really great projects. I don't think any of us want to artificially accelerate anything. We want to measure twice and cut once and make sure we're doing things smartly. But boy, it's like to get to the end result, it seemed like we were building the Empire State Building. What, if anything, just to have us put in our back pockets, are the things that slowed down the previous processes the most, and are we overcoming them? And are some of those in-house here? There's only so much we can do with Tallahassee or funding or whatever, is in your tool bag. But what can you tell us to educate us more on these projects coming up and how they'll be better, faster, cheaper, smarter, whatever the things are?
That's all the intention, to improve upon all of those. And I think the reality of the Bembridge parcels that we did have to go through a PUD amendment, that did have to go in front of public hearing, and that took, Cormac probably knows exactly, but I would say that was a 6 to 9 month process in and of itself. We're running concurrent tracks on that. That does not occur here. We are subject to administrative approval. We do not need to go through any rezoning process and through that political process of public hearings. So I think that in and of itself expedites the timeline of getting through the design, entitlements, and permitting. Another big lesson we've learned is local subcontractors are of critical importance, and trying to bring in general contractor or subcontractors who are out of the market, don't have the labor here, don't have the supply chain here, really is a critical factor to ensuring the biggest risk we have, which is construction risk. We know there's demand, we lock in our financing, construction risk is our biggest risk, and I think that's where we'll be working, as well with more of a local team that can really address it. And the focus is definitely more on execution than on cost at this point. And the lessons learned in general for me over my career is the cheapest cost definitely doesn't deliver the best results all the time. So, we're going to be much more cognizant of that, and I think this funding allows us to be more cognizant of that, because now we're not so subject to the pressure of the economics. Being able to deliver a high-quality product and use highly qualified contractors and subs is going to be a big solution and a big help for us.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, sir.
Commissioner McDaniel.
Yes, I have two questions. Number one, compatibility with the area. Driving down 951 there, I'm not remembering 7 stories being in close proximity. I know there are some towers down close to the airport. How's this proposition with regard to that?
I'll just answer quickly, and if Mr. French wants to speak, I'm more than welcome to. The reason we're okay from a development perspective with the height, there is a development, the Live Local Act, just to kind of answer the question first, is about I think it's 1 mile from the site, the highest building. I don't know the exact building that reference that has been vetted with your planning and zoning administrative staff, and that was the verification we received back from them that was the height limitation, was effectively 75 feet, which gives us a maximum of 7 stories. From our development perspective, we are putting this on a primary frontage on Collier Boulevard. It has the presence. This is not located within a single-family neighborhood. There's the mobile home park, which is an older mobile home park that's been there. And there are some townhomes in a few parcels over. But overall, given that it's the frontage, that's where we got comfortable with the height, and we don't think that it necessarily clashes with the overall massing of the community because of its location on that primary frontage.
Sure. I'll let staff speak, but don't go, well, you can go ahead, yes, okay. That's fine.
Thank you, Commissioner. For the record, Jamie French. Your Fiddler's Creek PUD, so this is literally right next door. So you're within, even if the glitch bill comes out with Live Local, they're still going to meet the site distance, and they're built or approved to 75 feet. So they can apply that same height limitation there as Fiddler's Creek under Live Local.
Okay, very good. And then my other question for you, Chris, and you mentioned the Collier County Land Trust as a partner in another development that you're doing over behind Hacienda. And then you're partnering with them again. I want to be very clear that this is not Collier County's land trust that you're partnering with. This is a separate, not-for-profit organization. And what's your rationale for utilizing them as an interim step between the county's ownership of this property and yours?
Sure, it's not a necessity. I'll start out with that. It is something that we think does add value because it gives you some stewardship of these lands over time to be able to ensure that the affordability is there. It also provides us with some incentives under the Live Local Act. The land value would be exempt from ad valorem taxes. The building would still be taxed as it's currently drafted. So there is some incentive there to take a little relief off of the operating expenses, which allows us to borrow more debt and build a better product, et cetera. So there was the benefit on that end, as well as what we've heard and understood the land trust's intention is to work with the county to ultimately, albeit a separate entity, to be a steward of various county resources and programs that they're administering to ensure affordability, to ensure the quality of the product, et cetera. But again, it's not an absolute necessity. It's something we thought would add some value to the public.
And again, I'm not objecting to it particularly, but I think it's very important to qualify the fact that that's not a county entity. That's a separate third party that's in between the county and you. And so you may perceive that as a value. I'm not seeing that as a need. We can certainly strike a deal. We're obviously quite comfortable in working with you. And I'm not uncomfortable in working with the Collier County Land Trust. It's just that that's a separate organization, completely separate organization. And where do they fit and why do they fit in this transaction between us and you?
And just to put a pin in it, we are not here today asking for the land trust to be directly involved. Our request is to enter into a lease with the county. If the county and staff and we want to bring this back, or if we want to discuss that, if that's an administrative approval, if there needs to be that extra conduit for any reason, or if that's the desire of the county, we can discuss it, but we're not here asking for that today. So there's no requirement on our end. There's no necessity on your end. And I think that's crystal clear. So the land trust was an idea that we thought may add some value, and we're open to it.
Got it. I'm not closed to it. I want to say that out loud. I'm not saying there's anything negative with regard to it. It just needs to be delineated, distinguished as a separate organization. And I want to hear from our staff whenever the developer agreement comes back, because I think today we're just voting on the approval of the acquisition utilizing the sales tax money. Then there's going to be a development agreement come back where there will be specifics with regard to the percentages of AMI, how many units, so on. The proposition here is the proposition, but there'll actually be a developer agreement. You already heard that I want to see flexibility in those numbers with regard to affordability, with pragmatism and a matrix to be able to allow you that opportunity to move based upon what the needs in fact are. And then I'll get a report from staff as to the value for the county having the land trust, the Collier County Land Trust, being an interim in between. So with that, you want to make the motion for approval, Commissioner?
Yeah, absolutely.
We have a comment.
Unless you got some comments.
Yeah, we have two more.
I'm
Three
sorry.
more. Commissioner Saunders.
Thank you. For a little bit of education for me, the land cost in this particular project is about $24,000 per unit. Typically, what type of per unit land cost can you afford for these types of projects? I know it's a lot of interest, there are a lot of things that go into that, but just in general,
Yeah,
what are you looking for?
I will say the value, anything under $30,000 is a huge value in this county. As you know, land is limited, but zoned land that you can actually build an apartment development on is extremely limited, and largely just to the planned unit developments that are out there. And most of those planned unit developments are entitled by the developer who's intending to actually develop them. So as we've been in this county for 4 years and looking every corner of it, one of the biggest challenges is finding land that is well suited for multifamily housing, that we can afford, and that is within one of these basis boost areas that I'd mentioned. So we feel extremely lucky to have found this site that kind of checks all of those boxes. And the land value itself is very underwritable from a financing perspective. You know, it depends on the other sources of funding, but you know, we would probably top out on our programs around $40,000 a unit. So we still have some good value here.
Well, hopefully there are other locations that will meet those criteria. I will say that this is exactly the type of project that was contemplated when we put that line item in the 1 cent sales tax to create that $20 million fund. And if there are other developers listening, hopefully there are other developers and other properties that will meet these criteria. But I want to thank you. This is a really incredible project. With all the projects that you're developing, I think it comes out to 602 units altogether. If I may have not added that up correctly, but in that range. And that puts a dent into the need, and hopefully we'll have more projects like that. And whoever makes the motion, I'll second it.
Oh, quit.
Commissioner Kowal.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are more just kind of a self-education to myself because, you know, from my understanding of the Live Local Act and, you know, from what I was told, you know, when it was going through the state and finally got passed and the governor signed it last March, and I'm not against this. I don't want you to take these questions, you know, I should be because you cut me out of the picture in the ribbon cutting. I saw that. So
I don't remember you there.
Evidently, nobody's going to remember me now. So, but that being said, I thought the intent of the Live Local Act was that individuals or developers to use their own money to buy blighted, old, rundown commercial properties that only have 50% occupancy and invest that money and automatically get a magic wand wave, say, hey, it's residential now, build up to as high as the closest building, 1 air mile away, and this and that. Not so much a partnership of the people's money being used to buy the property and then intermixing the two, you know. I just clarify this for me, or maybe staff can help me, but I'm just trying to get a grip on it because I don't think that was the intent of the Live Local Act.
I think that's one of the scenarios that was thrown out there, analogy, when Live Local was on the table in front of the committees originally. Like, we have this, and at that time when this was thought of, it was I think the state was in a different place with COVID still, when this kind of came out of that, and we saw occupancies in retail spaces drop. So that was one of the catalysts, seeing that market change, that I think brought the Live Local Act. The Live Local Act is much more comprehensive than that. It provides a number of incentives, preemptions, different funding sources, hometown heroes, for instance, a mortgage program. There's a lot of things that got put into that bill with a more comprehensive effort to stimulate affordable and workforce housing. That is one scenario, and unfortunately, we've looked around for older commercial buildings, and your occupancies are very strong here still. So we never found the opportunity, but that was one of those, here's what we're thinking about, this could help, but it certainly isn't limited to that. So there's a lot of ways to make these deals work, and the reality of the other headwinds that we're facing is that it often takes partnership. It takes collaboration, it takes work with local governments, it takes work with the state, it takes work with foundations in some cases, it takes work with operating partners. There's really, this business is not your traditional market rate development. You find your lender, you find your investor, you build your product, and you pay some waterfall of returns. This program is really set up for partnerships. It is a public partnership itself. This is a federal credit administered by the state. You got the state entity who we're in agreements with for we're 50 years on those land use restriction agreements that we enter into in consideration for their gap funding or for their tax credits. Fortunately, that's not enough to get it done these days. You do have to commingle sources of funding, and it's a tough thing to do. I think this is kind of the labor of love. Is that it's not the easiest business, but it is a really feel-good business, and it is a business that certainly has no shortage of demand. So I don't know if that answered your question fully, but the idea is to, public-private partnership through Live Local. Live Local provides one piece, but it's not necessarily enough to make deals happen. And then you'll see that over time, that just because the legislation is in place, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a flood of development as a result of that. There's a lot of other factors and variables that all have to align right for us to be able to make these things happen.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So, Chris, I'll sum up with this before we finish up with the motion. I do have a question and a concern. It's both the same. I can see all of the stars aligning, which excites me. I love this. But one thing, how long did it take you to complete the Santa Barbara project?
7 years.
20 months.
Oh, yeah, but from start to finish, that might have been the construction, but
Oh, sure.
I think Chris Hall's,
from the time
Commissioner
that
Hall's
we
saying the
had-
same thing I am, is like, from conception, to when we cut the ribbon.
From the time I was sitting here originally in front of many of you, a couple of different faces here, I think that was June, July of 2019.
So we had COVID, we had some issues. How long has it taken you from the very get-go for the Allegro and the Cadenza project?
Those came together without some of the challenges we had on Bembridge. There wasn't a new entitlement. We didn't need to amend a PUD, et cetera. So those came together much faster. Put me on the spot on the dates, but those both of those projects started. We initially applied for funding, which is really the trigger. It's hard to spend all those dollars and make that investment until we get an idea that we're content or confident enough that we're going to have the funding to go forward on it. So those are probably 2.5 years in the making, and we have both of them scheduled to deliver units for occupancy in the third and fourth quarter, respectively, of this year.
Okay, fair.
Or actually, sorry, the first one's coming online next quarter.
So I guess my concern was on the application, you had listed 5 years for completion, and that didn't really make me warm and fuzzy, because this is a need that we have sooner than later. And I didn't know if we could, I don't know if this is for Cormac or county attorney, but are we able to approve the surtax funding with an understanding that we're going to do this faster than 5 years, with a firm commitment, just to make me feel better?
You could do that if you want. I don't know how comfortable they're going to be.
I'm just asking.
It's not uncommon to have conditions because you want to see progress. You're tying up funds that, if we don't move forward, rightfully so, you want to dedicate to another project, and that's why shovel readiness is often a factor in all of this. And I think that comes with a competent developer who's done their due diligence to be able to move that forward through a convoluted timeline and critical path. So in this case, it would not be unusual, and we would be open to putting some term on it whereby if we don't close financing, which means we put a shovel in the ground by a certain period in time, that we would have to come back in front of the board to extend that.
I guess my question is, can we do that now, or do we need the developer agreement to come?
They're going to be bringing forward a developer agreement. I think that would be the opportune time to raise the issue. Typically, we put mileposts in these agreements, financing, what have you. So I'm sure staff will consider that.
I bring it up, Chris. I'm not looking to flush you by any means. I'm looking to get some teachers and some firefighters in those apartments as fast as we can. So that's why I bring it up. So Do we have a motion?
Got a motion? I make the motion to approve. I mean, we have a lot of homework assignments buried in it.
I'll
but-
second.
Okay, yeah, line jumper.
Line jumper.
Commissioner, if it's the will of the board, before we bring back the developer agreement, we'll ask them, not to quote Commissioner LaCastro, but we so appreciate when he says, use a sharp pencil, because I say that often, especially when they're applying for permits. Nonetheless, we'll identify those considerations in your lease agreement, perhaps with some clawback provisions like we've done before, so that there's some penalties in it if they don't hit their mark.
Good. Fair enough.
Just one more comment in terms of timeline. We fully expect this to be much quicker than the last number of projects. This was, as Chris said, this was a very difficult time to build in. We had supply chain issues, we had labor issues, and part of the labor issues you were faced with is, I think all you read the newspapers, this country has had a record number of market rate apartment communities built over the last number of years. I mean, it's astounding. Like, I think there's 600,000 units that are going to be completed this year in the country, and that drained the workforce. And so we quite frankly had labor problems with some of the subs, and that really delayed us. And the economics of building an apartment community market rate today is, if you don't have everything, you can't put a shovel in the ground and make something pencil today. Jamie will probably back me up on that one. It just doesn't work. So that's all going to stop. And we don't believe we're going to have the labor problems that we had before. And we've learned our lessons related to subs and contractors, et cetera. And we've already got a plan in place to make this much quicker.
Great. Thank you, Pat. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Moving forward.
Thank you.
Commissioners, that brings us to item 16A7, now item 11C. This is a recommendation to waive the nighttime hearing requirement and hear a land development code amendment regarding food trucks and food truck parks at 2 regularly scheduled daytime Board of County Commissioners meetings and approve a request to advertise land development code amendment. This is being brought to the agenda at Commissioner Saunders' request, and Mr. Mike Bosey, your Director of Planning and Zoning, is here to answer questions or present.
Mr. Chairman, I can be very quick. Obviously, food truck parks can have a rather significant impact on a community. And I know that there was a public hearing, and I guess a neighborhood information meeting. And my question is, for the board, because this can be such a impactful type of a project, should we have at least one nighttime hearing? I'm not a fan of nighttime hearings, even though we've got one this evening. But I'm just wondering, in terms of this particular issue, whether or not that should be given some consideration. I'm okay with having both hearings during the day, but I want to at least have a little bit of discussion as to whether we should open this up a little bit more. That's my question.
Mr. Castro.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I like the idea of at least testing it. We're hearing from a lot of citizens who they would like to see this meeting in the evening, which is not realistic. We get those emails all the time. We're all at work, we can't participate, and it's like, okay, well, we're at work too, and this is where our work happens. If you remember back to the conversation of the Isles of Capri food truck park, and then we talked a bit about Celebration Park, I think when it comes to the food trucks, it's still a really new and unique, type of thing that we don't have our arms fully around. So one of the things I've said generically is night, day, evening, morning, whenever, I'm all for not squelching citizen comment or fleshing out as much feedback as we can get. So it doesn't mean we're passing something that says from here on out in perpetuity we'll have all nighttime meetings, but I don't know if there was something in the middle that showed we were trying to be positive, and then if it didn't have a positive result, then okay, we tried it. And so I don't know, that was just my initial thought. I might not know every single detail that you're trying to kind of cover, but my initial thought was it doesn't hurt, and we see what happens. But
Mr. McDaniel.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, if it's I think in this digital age that we have with hybrid meetings, I know we all do town halls and have them with multiple options for folks to attend. You know, I'm not opposed to having an evening meeting, at least one of these hearings in the evening. But you know, on the same token, I don't really see the need for it either. It's a conducting business, and I know myself, and I know most of us do as well. Personally, I take emails and phone calls and comments from people, whether they're standing at the podium and wearing a red shirt in the room, as most important as the folks that are standing at the podium and wearing a red shirt. So, I mean, what was your intent, Commissioner Saunders? I mean, I think the intent was to waive the nighttime hearings, and hear these food truck amendments during the day.
Well, that's what the request is of staff, and I understand it, and there was a public hearing in the evening on this earlier on, but people don't really get energized over issues until they see something in the paper or they know something's coming up for us to vote on. Now, this is not site-specific, and so it may not generate any interest. But if there was a food truck park, for example, going into Isle of Capri, as an example, the one we had, there would be tremendous interest in that because it's site-specific. So there may not even be anybody that would show up for this.
Right.
But these are very controversial, and that's just a thought. And as I said, I have no issues with having 2 daytime hearings, but I just thought it was worth the discussion on an issue like this.
When I was reviewing this, this is more of an adoption of land development code criterion to, because the way I understand it, we're going to be hearing every single one of these. It's going to become a conditional use when one of these proposed already existent zoning classification qualifies for a food truck park. That's still not going to be a by right process. They still have to come to us, and those would be the ones that I would prefer when the site-specific ones are coming to us, that maybe we move those to a nighttime hearing. But this one is just a land development code adjustments to facilitate those site-specific and move them to, my understanding is, move them to a conditional use process.
All right. Well, that convinces me that we don't need to have a night hearing on this, as long as we are flexible to having a night hearing when an application comes before us.
Let's look at him making sure he's shaking his head positively, because I don't want to misquote what his intent is.
And Mike Bose, zoning director, as it's proposed, there's not a requirement in the conditional use is triggered when you have any proposed outdoor amplified sound or alcohol being associated with these food trucks. One food truck at a commercial center that doesn't have amplified sound or alcohol does not require a board approval. That could be straight a site development plan amendment. But it's if they have alcohol involved, or if they have alcohol and it is amplified sound, those are the ones that require conditional uses.
Well, what I was looking at was there's 2 things here. It's regarding food trucks and food truck parks, and it was the food truck parks that's got my attention. Certainly don't need a nighttime hearing on an application for putting a food truck at a bazaar at a park or something like that. But if we're going to develop a food truck park similar to what was discussed on Isle of Capri, then I think something like that probably should come back at night. So I'll make the motion to approve waiving the nighttime hearing for this purpose. But if we do have a food truck park, it's not part of the motion, but if we do have a food truck park, I think consideration should be given to having something like that in the evening.
Staff can modify the proposed language to put a verbiage that we will poll the Board of County Commissioners as to whether you would like to see that conditional use hearing moved to a nighttime hearing.
That'd be perfect.
We can put that within the proposed orders. We'll make some modifications. Just to let you know, we did have a nighttime hearing with the Planning Commission on the 7th of December. There were no public who attended, and I think you're right. Unless it's a site-specific location, it's hard to get the public to get excited about the proposal of an LDC amendment.
I'll make that motion to approve this with the understanding that if there is a food truck park that the board will be presented with the opportunity to have a night hearing if the board so chooses at that time.
Mr. Kowal.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I was on the same lines, Commissioner McDaniel, on the way I looked at this, and now Mr. Bosey's kind of confirmed it, that, you know, if it's specific, you know, we're looking at a particular park, and someone wants to develop, designate the food trucks. And I mean, you can see we've already exercised our time certain. We're going to do that today at 5 o'clock. And I think, you know, we get the temperature of our constituents on a particular item like this. If there's a food truck, you know, that we're going to hear it, and, you know, a park, we're going to hear it in the future regardless, that, you know, we can always exercise the time certain, you know, and not have to create a whole, you know, another ordinance or something just on those lines. So but I feel comfortable with the motion the way it is. I'll second.
So just to follow up my comments, you know, I don't want to get into the habit of every hot issue that comes up that we need to feel obligated to do it in an evening meeting. I know, like Commissioner McDaniel, I've got the best interest of my constituents. It may not be what I personally want to do, but I'm going to back them. That's what they elected me to do. And whether they're in the room at 7 o'clock at night, or whether they've made their emails plain, their phone calls plain, I don't take no one's more important here than they are on my email. And I want to say that because I don't mind doing, I'm not opposed to making the extra effort, but I don't want to get into the habit of feeling like we need to pacify people that just can make it in the evenings when they have every ample opportunity to let us know and to communicate in times advance. So with that comment, we have a motion and we have a second to waive this. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Commissioners, that is the end of our regular agenda items, except for public comment on general topics not on the current or future agenda that weren't addressed previously. It may be something we want. Do we have one now?
Well, yeah, that's just it. I have a Zoom person that was mislabeled. Actually, we probably should have heard them at 7. If, with your indulgence, can we hear them now?
Yes.
Okay, Jackie Key is joining us on Zoom. Jackie, you're being prompted to unmute yourself. I know you're there, Jackie. There you go. You have 3 minutes, Jackie. Yes, we can.
I'm here for sure.
Go ahead, Jackie.
So good afternoon. My name is Jackie Kay. I will be talking about religious hypocrisy today. In the parable of the 4 soils, Mark 4:14, Jesus reveals how 4 groups of people respond to the truth of God's word. The first 3 groups of people either don't listen, the word does not take root in their hearts, or the pleasures of this world is more important than following Christ. The 4th group of people are the good soil. These are true disciples who are willing to obey, suffer, and give up everything for Christ. In essence, Jesus is telling us that most people who say they are Christians, i.e. religious hypocrites who reject God, do not have a relationship with him. With the social and political climate, how can you tell the difference between the true disciples of Christ and the religious hypocrites? Let's look at Jesus's qualities to see how they compare to Satan's, which should tell people whose kingdom they are aligned with. So for Jesus, we have love, kind, protector, humility, forgiveness, empathy, compassion, joyful, self-control, tolerance, selfless, truth, servant, peaceful. He died for our sins and he lives out the scriptures. And then we have Satan, evil, toxic, bully, delusional, hate, no empathy, selfish, two-faced, seeks power and control, and the 7 deadly sins of greed, lust, pride, envy, gluttony, wrath, sloth. He tempts us to sin, and he quotes and weaponizes scriptures. Jesus also dealt with religious hypocrites. In John 8:44, he told the Pharisees they were like their father, the devil, who was a murderer, liar, and father of lies. The current religious hypocrites are blaspheming the name of Jesus Christ to garner votes, to justify lies, evil, racism, and homophobia. Like the Pharisees, they are possessed by the same devils. They have weaponized Jesus, God, and are attacking the very people he wants to have a relationship with. They are lying about Jesus, waging war against and causing damage to his kingdom. They have chosen to become God's enemy. At the appointed time, God will defend his kingdom against such satanic attacks. These are end time confirmations. Lastly, Jesus loves us very much unconditionally. And to say to people out there, I love you all too. And love is the greatest power that can change any person's heart and soul. So thank you all very much. That is it.
Commissioners, with that, it leaves staff and Commission General Communications. It would be your pleasure whether you want to take these when we conclude the 5 p.m. time certain, or if you would like to handle these now.
I'm down with doing them now and getting them.
I'm down with doing them now to get them away, yeah.
Shouldn't be a lot.
Commissioner Saunders said something about pizza tonight, so I'm going to get that.
All right, well, I'll start. Only have one item for you, and it's just to advise you that there's a request from the city of Marco Island for some work on Tiger Tail Beach and Sand Dollar Island for tilling and raking at the north end. And it is time sensitive due to the permitting. So we will be out there working, but the cost will be reimbursed by the city of Marco Island. And if we need to take any further action and after the fact, we'll bring that back to you all. But just wanted to advise you that would be happening. Mr. Rodriguez.
All good, thank you.
County Attorney.
Well, good, thank you.
All right, Chair.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two. The first of which is I'd like to get a head nod on suggesting that we give direction to our staff to prepare GMP and LDC amendments, whichever is requisite, to better manage the charter school implementation in Golden Gate Estates. And I'd like to give direction to staff to start that process. I want to move those charter schools over to a conditional use process and not by right as they have been treated so far. And so if it meets with your consent, I'd like for us to give direction for that process to be begun. We'll certainly see all those things. It'll all come back to us, but I need to have your concurrence to give that direction.
Oh, I like that.
I like it too, and I think as part of that, we would need some information from the county attorney as to what authority we do have as part of that proposal.
We'll work with staff.
In perpetuity.
Took my line.
And then secondarily, we had given previous instruction with regard to the exotic removal ordinance that we have, and it's very cumbersome. I'd like an abeyance of those rules interimly here until March when that comes back before us so that we can in fact move forward with.
So I had a conversation yesterday with staff, and I was aggravated at why it took so long. So what we're going to do is put a stay on that action.
That's the abeyance of the rules.
Until, okay, I didn't understand that.
Okay.
I'm from Texas.
Yes.
So we're gonna nip that for the time being until we can come back and make it official.
That's correct. So those are the two items that I had, sir.
Do we need a vote of the board to?
We got positive head nods to do that if in fact you folks are in favor of that.
But do we need a vote of the board to give that direction? No? Because you're putting a pause on it right now until we fix that problem.
Correct.
You don't need a motion to do that.
Correct. With your decision today, we will stop those inspections until we bring the ordinance changes back to you in March.
Well, Mr. County Attorney, do we need to have a formal motion so that it becomes a decision of the board? If not, that's fine.
I think it's more prudent to have a motion so nobody down the line can question it.
Moved. I second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Commissioner LaCastro.
Ms. Patterson brought this up about Marco and Tiger Tail and Hideaway, and Boy, the misinformation in my district about why we were and weren't raking beaches and all that, I'll just give you the short version. I mean, when environmental groups come down and say, you know, you have a grassy, patchy area on your beach and you can't rake it because birds are feeding there, we can't do it just because we got 100 emails and people who you know, want us to just do it anyway. But my shout out is really to Trinity Scott, Coastal Zone Management, all the county staff that were working with me. We're getting very, very colorful emails from citizens. So impressed with the professionalism of Andy Miller from Coastal Zone Management and his staff and all of us who are replying back to citizens, trying to separate rumor from fact. We're now out there raking because the birds are no longer feeding and nesting, but it wasn't negligence. We weren't stupid. We weren't leaving algae and grass on the beach, and we didn't care about it. But we could have easily popped off very quickly and, you know, got back to citizens in a very colorful way. You know, maybe I did a little bit, but the staff didn't. So thank you all. I guess from what I understand, we're out there now because we've gotten all of the permits and approvals from the state and from these environmental agencies that we were squeezing every day. And so, you know, thank you for that effort. And I know the citizens that understand the moving parts appreciate it. That's all I have.
Mr. Kowal.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I did learn something today, that in perpetuity means 3-2 or 99 years. I saw that several times in a few of our different items today. So I didn't know that, but now I do. The other thing, back to Conservation Collier, I had this conversation with the manager's staff and the manager herself. And I know we've been looking ways to save money, pinch here, cut here, you know, cut here. And I know we're actually looking at possible, you know, the zero-based budgeting, you know, here in our future, near future. You know, and I was asking questions about the maintenance side of the Conservation Collier, and come to find out, so I didn't realize, but we have a certain staff that is dedicated only to the maintenance of these properties that are within that program. And I know initially when we purchase a property, that the initial buying of it and the initial clearing of it and the exotics and the things to get it to the point where it's, you know, it's acceptable for their standard, that's the biggest hit. But a lot of times, you know, some of these people in the staff, I don't know if they're just doing busy work from time to time, or, you know, is this something we can look at to where we're, you know, I know we have the, we just created the task force out in the estates for our stormwater team to do cleanup and, you know, clean swells and things of that nature. You know, maybe we could possibly join, you know, these teams, so when there's downtime in the Conservation Collier maintenance side of it, that they can be working alongside with our, you know, Trinity's group with some of these other projects that are just as important, you know, to us. And we're kind of like sharing the cost, and we're not dumping a whole lot of money or bringing in a subcontractor for some things that the team could possibly do, you know, with equipment and that for the conservation properties. So maybe cutting some, because we just learned today in that report that, you know, we're going to save $2 million up to almost $2.4 million in doing a lot of in-house inspection on our future projects. You know, this is also could be something we can look at and say, you know, maybe we can share the manpower in the future. So I just wanted to have that conversation maybe in the future.
I hope it's common business practice. If we have silos going on internally, departmentally, that siloing stops. We're all one.
Big old team. Commissioner Saunders.
Yes, sir.
I don't think I have anything to add other than look forward to seeing everybody at 5 o'clock.
I don't have anything, so with that, we will recess and be back at 5 o'clock.